Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going through all 167 champions in League of Legends and talking about what I think their best builds are in Season 14. Obviously, each champion will be timestamped in the description below, so feel free just to skip around. Before we get started though, I'll talk about how I kind of found the builds and, what research I did, because obviously I don't play all, 167 champs in the game, so I'll talk about the sites that I've used. First one is OPGG. In my opinion, OPGG is actually probably the least important site on this list. But a nice thing you can do with OPGG is you can open up a champion and you can take a look at some of the high elo one tricks of it. You can, filter this by certain elos, filter it by certain servers, and this can be a good way to find one tricks that aren't pro players. So it helps to kind of, I don't know. A lot of the time, this is, like I said, not the most useful, but it can give you some ideas for some of the less popular champs. Obviously, popular champs are going to be represented here instead. So if you're looking at a champ that is reasonably meta, Pro Builds is a great place to look. What you can do is you can just come and filter by a certain champion. So let's say we want to take a look at Ahri. We can just come onto here and we'll have a bunch of games from pro players that are playing it recently. We can open up each of these games, take a look at the runes, the items they're building, which order, and so forth. So this site is very useful. Another one is Lolalytics. So Lolalytics is probably the best actual stats website. So while OPGG and stuff do have stats, in my opinion, Lolalytics is the most accurate and also has just the widest variety of stats. So let's say we open Aatrox here. We've got a lot of win rates on the builds, on items at certain points, against certain champions, and a whole heap of info. So it can be quite overwhelming, but if you did want to make kind of a statistics-based analysis, I suppose, of your item build, this would probably be the place to look. Another place you can check out is Games of Legends. So this filters pro games, and what you can do is you can either come and click on a champion from this list. So we could click on Akali, or what we could do is we could come up here and search Akali, and then we could just take a look at all the builds from Season 14, come take a look at the match list, and then you can open each of these games individually if you want, and that can allow you to take a look at the builds. You can figure out, how good the runes and stuff were. So this gives a lot of info as well. And the final place I'd recommend looking is Leaguepedia. So Leaguepedia is quite nice because you can certain champs. So here I'm looking at Orianna's match history. If you just type in Leaguepedia Orianna, and then you go match history, then you can come over here and it will actually have VODs of the game. So you can click these links to open up YouTube VODs, and then you can actually see it in action. So through all these sites, as well as using Twitter, I've seen a lot of different build posts on Twitter. That's kind of where I've gotten all my information from. Obviously, there will be things in this video that I'm wrong about, and I'm sure you guys will correct me in the comment section below. But with all that stuff out of the way, let's get into the champions themselves. At the very top of our list is Aatrox, and the Aatrox build is really simple. Pretty much everyone is going Sundered Sky into Shojin and then into Bruiser items, so some examples being the ones here. I will say that there are a couple one tricks that are going Shojin into Sundered Sky instead, so that's something you could try as well. And another thing worth mentioning is that you don't actually have to go Bruiser items. You can go tank items after this. Like I see a lot of, sometimes instead of a Moor, you will go something like a Kanek, and that can be really, really strong because the tank items are pretty overtuned. So definitely don't sleep on those tank items, but the start of your build is pretty much always going to look the same, and then you just round it out with situational items. Ahri has several builds to choose from, and by far the most common is going Malignant Storm Surge and then items of your choice. I would recommend going Rabadons after. I personally don't think Shadowflame third item is that great. Obviously, if you needed something like a Zhonya's, you could pick it up, but I think, if you can pick up Deathcap third, especially if you have stacks on Darkseal, you probably should. Some other builds you can try is you can go a CDR build still with Malignance Cosmic, and then, something like Cryptloom or even Rabadon's third. I think that is quite a good build as well. If you want to try a really cheesy one-shot build, actually it's not even cheesy, just a one-shot build is Chapter Storm Surge Shadowflame, and then you go Deathcap, and you can actually upgrade your Chapter to Malignance at 4 items or something. I think that's quite good as well. So you have a lot of choices on this champ. I think overall the best, if you don't really want to think about it, is just go Malignant Storm Surge into Rabadons, but I do think there are cases for the other builds as well. Akali's build centers around a couple key items. So the first one being Storm Surge. You're going to rush this out most games. If you're going Storm Surge, I'd probably recommend going Shadowflame second, just because it's the most damage. That being said, if you want a build that has a bit more tankiness and the ability to close the gap a bit easier, then you probably want to go Proto Belt into Storm Surge. That can be a good build as well. At that point, while you can go Shadowflame third, a lot of the time it might be better, just at this point, to go something like a Void or a Lichbane or a Zhonya's, just because later in the game, the flat Magic Pen does become a little less valuable. So I'd pretty much be looking for this, the Storm Surge Shadowflame or the Proto Belt Storm Surge, and then after that, thinking about your situational items. Zhonya's, Deathcap, Void, Lichbane, all that sort of stuff is a possibility. Akshan has a couple different builds right now, one of which is lethality and the other is on hit. So lethality builds pretty much all center around Voltaic. You're going to be wanting to go something like Voltaic Collector into situational items after that. You can also play something like Voltaic Ghostblade or even Ghostblade Voltaic into situational items. I wouldn't recommend dropping Voltaic completely. I think that this item is so OP that it should be in every one of your lethality builds. So personally, I wouldn't recommend something like this. If you are against a tankier comp, which is not that common in solo queue at the moment, but if you are, you can play something like Bork Rageblade Terminus or Bork Kraken Terminus, and those are really, really good at dealing with those tankier teams, but it just doesn't happen very often, so at the moment, I'd really recommend lethality builds. Alistar's build is similar to a lot of the other tank supports at the moment, which is obviously you're starting with support item. This will later be upgraded into Celestial. Then for your first item, I mean, we can choose between Locket or Trailblazer. After that, it's pretty much just situational support items, depending on which ones you want. An underrated item, of course, is Frozen Heart, which is very cheap at the moment and is very, very strong overall, so don't forget about that. But yeah, it's pretty much just the standard tank support build at the moment. Amumu has a couple different roles, so there's support and jungle. I'll start with support. You're going to want to do what the other tank supports do, just rush out Celestial and then be thinking about items like Locket and Trailblazer. After that, you can situationally go for other support items, or you can obviously just build regular tank items, which work as well. If you're playing jungle Amumu, you're definitely thinking a lot about the new tank items at the moment. So stuff like Hollow Radiance is really good if you want the magic resist. Obviously, Sunfire remains a good item. Jak'Sho is an extremely good item on the mega tanks right now. So it's pretty much just like your choice of tank items, but I would recommend starting with Sunfire or Hollow Radiance just for the AoE. But after that, it really is just up to what resistance you need. Anivia is another one of those champs with several builds at the moment. So the most standard, strongest scaling build is to go the Tier, Roa, Seraphs, Liandry's into Rabadons. This deals well with tanky comps, deals well with squishy comps, makes you very difficult to kill. And I'd say overall, if you have the time, it's probably the best build. That being said, if you want to spike a bit earlier in the game, you can skip your Rod of Ages and go something like Tier Malignance into Seraphs. Or you can even just go Seraph's Rush into Liandry's second, which can be quite good against the squishier comps. Overall, I think this build here at the top is probably the most consistent one and the one I'd recommend, but if you're finding your solo queue games are too fast, then the item you're wanting to think about skipping is Rod of Ages. In my opinion, though, it's really not that worth it. Like, the item is quite cheap, so you want to be picking it up, and there's a lot of bursts in the game at the moment, so having extra AP is really nice. But it is stuff you can think about. Most of the Annie builds at the moment are just making use of how OP the burst items are. So going something like Malignant, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame gives you a really big burst spike, and it's just going to allow you to pretty much kill anyone at any stage of the game. That being said, there are a couple other builds. So you can go something like Malignant's Rylai's Liandry or Malignant's Liandry Rylai, which gives you a lot more DPS in a team fight and might be better against tankier comps. Some other things you can think about is if you do just want to play for Engage, you can pick up a Protobelt earlier in the build. So you can go something like Chapter Protobelt, for example. I haven't actually tried that personally, but I've seen some other people do it. So yeah, it's something you can think about. Overall, though, I think you probably want to be looking for one of these builds. You can also do Chapter Storm Surge Shadow Flame, which is something that a lot of the other burst mages do at the moment, and just skip out this Malignance item. That being said, I think Malignance is pretty good on Annie, so I'd recommend either one of these builds or one of the DPS builds that I mentioned just before. Aphelios had his lethality build nerfed, so pretty much now you're just going Stormrazor IE or you're going Kraken IE, just depending on how many auto attacks you think you can get off in a fight. After that, it really is just standard ADC itemization. You're looking at items like BT, more LDR as your third item, and then obviously more crit items or more situational items from then on. Ashe has a couple builds and a couple roles. So the first one, if you just want to play a very standard crit build, you can go Kraken Triforce IE, which I think is reasonably strong. The on-hit build that ends up being very tanky on 4 items is also really good. So you can go something like Kraken, Terminus, Rageblade, and then Jak'Sho. Makes you very, very difficult to kill and honestly deals like quite a lot of damage despite how tanky you are. If you're playing Ashe support, you're probably upgrading your support item into Bloodsong. I have seen a couple people go Realm Spike, but I'm pretty sure Bloodsong is better. And then for your build, you'll be looking at things like Umbral and Mandate, which I think are quite good. You can go Axiomark for the ult cooldown later on in the game as well. For Aurelion Sol, I'm pretty sure the best build is this one here, where you go Tier, Rylai's, Liandry's, and then upgrade your Seraph's third. This feels the best because you need Rylai's early on this champion to help you chase people down, which is really, really nice. Obviously, Liandry's is pretty much the highest damage AP item you can buy just on its own, so it feels really, really good. After that, of course, upgrading your Seraphs, and then you can go for stuff like Deathcap from there on out. In my opinion, there isn't actually too much that you could change with this build. Like, I don't really think getting Seraphs before Liandry's is very good. I think Malignance is very overrated, so I would just recommend this as your Aurelion Sol build. Azir also has a couple builds, and I actually think the best one isn't even listed here. So in my opinion, the best build is to go Nash's Liandry Deathcap. You can get away with not having a mana item on this champ. especially if you take mana in your runes. So if you take Presence of Bind and Mana Flow, that can allow you just to skip the mana item completely. And then, yeah, like, you're safe enough that you can just go Nash's Liandry Deathcap and you deal an absolutely absurd amount of damage. There are builds where you go Lichbane, which is for good poke against some of the squishier comps where you think you can't auto non-stop. I would probably still go Deathcap or maybe even Zhonya's third against these comps. So Zhonya's can be quite good for the engage when you want to like go in, ult a bunch of squishies and then Zhonya so you don't immediately die. Or you can go Rabadon's third. I wouldn't really recommend going Shadow Flame. By that point, I think it is just outperformed by the Deathcap. Bardo's a champion that, to be honest, I think you can get away with building pretty much whatever you want, but I would recommend going Bloodsong as your support item. From then on, I mean, first item options, Trailblazer is, of course, one. Locker is another. You can even go Knight's Vow first. And later on, you're probably looking for some of those tankier items. So something like Frozen Heart is really, really good on him. Like something like this, I think here is a really, really good build. I would probably stick away from stuff like Morello. I mean, you can buy it for cheap abilities, but in my opinion, it's not very good. So yeah, just making sure you're picking up that Bloodsong and then choosing between like pretty much one of these three items or maybe the Knight's Vow as well as your first item and just fill it out with situational items from then. For Bel'veth builds, you can go Kraken into Stridebreaker, which is really, really good, especially if they have more ranged champs and you need to change them down. I'm kind of a fan of Kraken into Titanic, especially if you don't need the Stridebreaker. It makes you really, really tanky, so that's something you can think about. I have seen a few people experiment with stuff like Bork and Terminus. In my opinion, it's not quite as good, but it is something you could think about. And obviously from then on, like situational items, especially Wit's End, I think now giving the Tenacity is really, really good on Bel'veth, so that's definitely something that you can look for. Blitzcrank builds are really straightforward, so you're just going to upgrade your support item into Celestial, and you're going to be rushing out Trailblazer, I would say, pretty much every game. From then on, you can look for some of these cheap support items. Obviously, the Locket, Zeke's, and the Knight's Vow remain options. Frozen Heart also can still be a good option as well, just because it is such an overtuned item at the moment. Brand has a couple different roles, so we'll talk about both of them. First off, in the jungle, in my opinion, the best jungle build is actually to skip Rylai's. I think Rylai's is not actually that great at the moment, so I've seen something like Liandry's Storm Surge Shadow Flame, which gives you a ton of damage. If you do want to drop one of those items, you could drop the Storm Surge for a Rylai, so you could do something like Liandry's Storm Surge Shadow Flame. In my opinion, though, you don't really need a mana item, and I don't think Malignance is that great. A lot of the time, Zhonya is also not that good on Brand because you just get off all your damage anyway. So I really think a lot of the builds that are listed here aren't actually that good. I think, again, obviously, Liandry's is a great item. Rylai's is decent, not as good as before. Shadow Flame is extremely good for allowing you to deal a lot of damage. And for support Brand, you'll pretty much always be going Realm Spike with, again, Liandry's Rylai's. I would recommend buying the Liandry's first because it makes you do a lot more damage. But I suppose if you wanted the utility, you could go Rylai's first. Again, I would recommend staying away from Malignance. I don't think it's as great an item as people think. I think Morello is actually a really good item. It's very cheap, applies the Grievous Wounds, which is great for you because you're AoE, and also gives some really nice stats. So something like this, either Liandry, Rylai, Morello, or Rylai, Liandry, Morello, I think are both really good for brand support. And again, make sure you're building the Realm Spike. On Braum, we can upgrade our support item into either Celestial or Solstice Slay. I think both are not bad. And then for your first item, in my opinion, Zeke's is the best a lot of the time, but you can consider the other support items as well. But it's pretty much the same as other tank supports. I mean, really, it's just your choice of Locket, Knight's Vow, and Zeke's, and then kind of a bonus shout out to Frozen Heart, which is a very cheap item and accessible by any tank at the moment since it only costs 2,300 gold. Pretty much everyone is playing lethality builds at the moment on Briar, and Ghostblade obviously is a key for that because you need a lot of movement speed in order to chase people down. After that, really, it is just your choice. So Collector is an obvious one. Opportunity is a very good item. I think Voltaic is a very good item. So really, it's just, you know, you can look at these. I think the kind of Bruiser-esque Briar builds aren't very viable at the moment, so I would just recommend Ghostblade pretty much into lethality. Caitlyn's got a couple different builds at the moment. So the standard one is just to go Stormrazor, i.e. into situational items of your choice. So again, Rapid Fire, LDR, and BT are all very good. If you want to play lethality Caitlyn, something I've seen is like Tier, Collector, and Opportunity. You can play with Hubris, obviously. Pretty much just whatever lethality items you want are all really good on Caitlyn. I kind of prefer Crit Caitlyn at the moment, but again, like lethality is very viable. On Camille, pretty much every pro is playing this build here, where they go Triforce, Ravenous into Shojin. I think these items are pretty strong in combination with each other, and then after that, obviously you can round out with more Bruiser items, or even some of those tank items that have been added to the game as well. Those all look very strong. Cassio has a couple different builds, and it mainly depends on what you're playing against. So Rod of Ages is really, really good against burstier teams, and it pretty much makes you unkillable. It's also very, very cheap. So against those sort of comps, you'll just be wanting to go for this build here with a Tier into Roa, Seraphs, Liandry's, and then probably Deathcap after this. You can go Rylai's fourth, but it's delaying the Deathcap by a pretty long time, so I normally wouldn't recommend it. Alternatively, what you can do is you can just skip the Roa for a stronger early game and go Seraphs, Liandry's. You can go Rylai's third here if you wanted, but I think, again, Rylai's is a bit more of a bait this season. I don't think it's as strong as item as it was before. A lot of the time, I'm going basically Seras Liandry's Rabadons or Roa Seras Liandry's Rabadons, and I think those are the best builds at the moment. And of course, like later on, it really is just situational mage items, so stuff like Cosmic, Banshee are all good. You can play even Riftmaker later in your build. Rylai's, of course, after you've got your Rabadons. Void if you need it, just stuff like that. Cho'gath mainly gets played in the top lane at the moment, and he's a really good user of the new tank items. I think this build here in particular is really good, so going like Hollow Radiance or Unending Despair first, into, you know, the other one, and then a Jack Show. This is pretty much the mega tank build at the moment, and I really like it. If you do want to play AP Cho, like in mid lane or something, I'd probably go Rocket Belt and maybe Storm Surge, or like Rocket Belt, even Cosmic. I think there's definitely a Rocket Belt in the build though. Overall, I think AP Cho is not that great at the moment, just kind of feels like it isn't as strong as Tank Cho, so I'd recommend going for this build here. Corki's got several different builds, so the most standard one is this one here, where you go Tier, Triforce, Manamune, IE. In my opinion, this isn't the best build anymore. I think that now Eclipse doesn't have lethality. It's really good if you can have it in your build. So the build we saw in LCK last night was Manamune Malignance into Eclipse. I think this is okay. I think it's really good later on in the game, but I think Malignance early in the game isn't too great on Corki, so I'm kind of not a fan of this either. I think the best build is to go Tier, Eclipse, Manamune, Triforce, and then you can go like a Shojin or something after that. Worth noting is that with any Corki build, you can actually just rush out a Maw. If your lane is really hard, like really difficult AP burst lanes like Akali or Fizz at the moment, just rushing out a Maw will actually make it pretty much impossible. So going like something like, I don't know, Tier, Maw, Manamune, Eclipse, like something like that can work as well. So those are all things to think about. Again, I recommend the Tier, Eclipse, Manamune, Triforce Shojin build. I think that's the best. Darius builds are really easy. Pretty much everyone goes Triforce into Titanic. I have seen some people skip Titanic and just go, you know, something like this, just Triforce into Bruiser items. I'm pretty sure Triforce Titanic is the best right now though, as Titanic is really, really strong, and I think, you know, you pretty much can't play Darius without the Triforce. Diana is kind of similar to Akali, where you've got two builds. You can just rush straight Storm Surge Shadow Flame, which is your highest damage, but I think Diana is a bit more reliant on mobility than a champ like Akali, so a lot of the time you'll go for Protobelt Storm Surge, and then after that you have a situational item that you can buy, so you can go Protobelt Storm Surge into Zhonya, Protobelt Storm Surge into Shadow Flame. If you have a lot of AP from your runes or your Darksteel or whatever, you can go Protobelt Storm Surge into Rabadons. So those are all options, but pretty much every build is going to, you know, rotate around these two items and then just situational items based on when you need them. Mundo's build is very easy, so people at the moment just rush Heartsteel, and then it pretty much is just, if you're verse AD, you go Sunfire. If you're verse AP, you go Hollow Radiance. And then from then on, you can make use of OP tank items, so stuff like Jack Show is very good. You might want to fit a Titanic in your build at some point because it is really, really good with Mundo's high health pool. But yeah, other than that, you're really just looking to itemize based off what you see from your opponents. Again, the new tank items are very, very strong, so definitely things to look out for. Draven at the moment in Halo, most people I've seen playing it go for Hubris builds, so they go something like Hubris into Triforce or Hubris into Ghostblade, and then obviously you can look at Collector and IE from then on. So I think Hubris is a really good item, and especially on Draven, it's really good for snowballing. So pretty much your choice is just like, if you want more scaling, you'll only sit on the Dirk. If you want more early game, you'll go both Hubris and Ghostblade. And then you can kind of figure out from there, like how much early game versus how much scaling do you want. But I think Hubris is a really good item, and I would recommend going it most of the time. On Ekko, your best build most of the time is just to go Protobelt into Lichbane. I think Storm Surge might be a bit of a bait on this champ some of the time, just because it competes with some other very good items. So Ekko has really high AP ratios, which means Rabadons is really good. And obviously, again, having more AP is really, really nice with the Lichbane. So I like Protobelt, Lichbane, Rabadons. If you don't want to rush out of straight Rabadons, obviously you can go Zhonya's. So Protobelt, Lichbane, Zhonya's Rabadons is really good. I think Storm Surge is getting built a lot just because it's an OP item, and it makes sense, but in my opinion, the best build on Ekko is actually one without it. So again, Protobelt, Lichbane, Rabadons, or Protobelt, Lichbane, Zhonya's Rabadons, I think are the best. Elise is making the same decisions as a lot of other AP assassins at the moment, which is, if you want pure damage, you just go Storm Surge into Shadow Flame. Alternatively, if you need the extra mobility, then going something like Rockabelt into Storm Surge can be quite good. Some things I've also seen is some people just drop Rockabelt and build a Lichbane instead, because Lichbane is pretty good on Elise, and the movement speed can kind of be a sub-in, I suppose, for the Rockabelt active. So that's something you can think about, because I think Lichbane is really, really good at the moment as well. So if you're not sure, I'd probably play this build here, but remember that there are other options to close the gap, either the Rockabelt or the Lichbane. And yeah, just abuse these items while they're still OP. On Evelynn, you're pretty much going full damage builds, except you're going to start off with a Protobelt. I think Protobelt is kind of required on Evelynn. Similar to Elise though, I have seen some people drop Protobelt just so they can grab Lichbane. It does make you very, very squishy, but it makes you deal a hell of a lot of damage. That being said, Evelynn overkills a lot of the time anyway, so I'd probably recommend a build like this. Something like Protobelt Storm Surge Deathcap, Protobelt Storm Surge Lichbane can be good. Obviously, Magi is a great item on Evelynn specifically because she is really hard to kill if you play it well. So yeah, all things you can consider. I probably wouldn't build a Magi if you're not building a Rocket Belt because you're going to be too squishy. But yeah, I'd recommend one of these builds probably. On Ezreal, you're pretty much always going tier Triforce Matammune into situational items. So that can be stuff like Cyrilda, it can be Shojin, it can be Navori, it can even be tankier items like Frozen Heart. So you really just got to look at the enemy team comp and decide. But I'm pretty sure Triforce and Mirror Mana are pretty much required. So just start with this. And then if you're not sure, I think at the moment, you probably want Shojin most of the time. Navori if you're auto-attacking a ton, and then like Shojin in the other cases. Obviously, if you're versus 80 Assassins, Frozen Heart can be good. But yeah, always start with this, and then kind of round out your build from there. So most of the Fiddlesticks builds contain a Malignance, which I think is kind of a bait. I'm pretty sure it is better just to go something like Protobelt Storm Surge, or, you know, Protobelt Zhonya's or something like that. The thing I don't like about Malignance is I think that is overall like less damage than the other options. That being said, Ultimate Ability Haste is really nice. At the same time, like, is Fiddlesticks an ult that you're going to use literally on cooldown? No, but then again, it has a really long cooldown, so I'm not totally sure if it's better to go Protobelt Malignant or better to go Protobelt Storm Surge. I have a feeling that once the changes come in, Malignance gets buffed and Storm Surge gets nerfed, the Protobelt Malignance will probably be better, but I think at the moment, going Protobelt Storm Surge is overall stronger. For Fiora builds, I think most people are going Triforce into Ravenous, at least in high elo. Obviously, you can go the other way around, but I'm pretty sure Triforce Ravenous is better. Hullbreaker, though, I'm very surprised it's still at the top. I think Hullbreaker is a pretty bad item now, and you see most Fioras just going into Bruiser after these two. So, you know, Death Stance, Sterax, some of the tankier items can be good as well. I'm pretty sure Hullbreaker, after the resistance change, just isn't really worth it anymore, so I'd stick away from it. But yeah, pretty much these are your two core items, and then you can choose situationally what you want after that. Fizz, most of the time you'll be going Storm Surge Lichbane. If you're against heavy skill shots in your lane, you can actually swap this around and go Lichbane into Storm Surge, but I'm pretty sure this is the better way around to do it. From that point on, you can go something like a Zhonya's, you can go a Deathcap after. I would probably not go Shadow Flame. I think at that point, you're better off going a Deathcap once you're 3 items in. You can go Protobelt on this champ. I'd probably recommend staying away from it, though. I just don't think it's really required. You have enough mobility already, and it's taking up one of these just like ultra high damage slots. So in my opinion, best build, Storm Surge into Lichbane, and then situational items such as Zhonya's or Deathcap from then. Galio's got 2 builds, which is you can either go full AP, or if you're against an AP Assassin, you can go for tank. So if you're solo AP, or if you're against an AD mid, you probably want this, which is Protobelt Storm Surge. It gives you a ton of damage, and then you can go against situational items after that. So stuff like Zhonya's, Magi's, Deathcap, all really good. If you're playing against an AP Assassin, then you can rush Hollow Radiance into Kanik. This is really, really good if the enemy team is really heavy on AP. They won't be able to move you out of lane at all, and it's really, really good against champs like Fizz and Akali. And actually, you still do quite a lot of damage, especially if you pick up something like a Riftmaker later in your build. So if you're not sure, it's probably better to go for the full AP Galio build, but the more AP they have, particularly if they have AP Assassins, the tank build is also very, very good. On Gangplank, most people are just playing the standard Essence, Reave, and Navori, sometimes going Triforce in games where you really need the HP. So that's kind of your standard and hasn't really changed. One thing I will say is that Solobaka has been playing a lot of AP Gangplank recently. I'll put a link to the tweet in the description where he talks about the build. So if you want to learn more about that, again, check the description for it. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on AP Gangplank, so I'm not sure, but I imagine it just does a lot of damage early game and probably does a lot of damage with ult too. So could be something to look out for. On Garen, you'll pretty much always just be going Triforce and Stridebreaker into tank items. So Deadman's being a very good one for the movement speed, and obviously the other kind of OP tank items at the moment, stuff like Kanik and Hollow and Unending Despair all being options. You can also go for more bruisers, so like Sterix and Cleaver, all that works. Just depends really on what you need in the game. So on Gnar at the moment, most people are going Triforce, Cleaver, Sterix, which I'm pretty sure isn't the best. I'm pretty sure it's better to go Triforce, Sundered Sky, and then either into Bruiser or Tank after then. Pretty sure Sundered Sky is just an OP item, so if you can fit it somewhere in your build, you probably should. And Gnar is a pretty good user of it. So yeah, I'd recommend going something like this rather than the Cleaver builds that don't have the Sundered Sky. Overall, I do think that's stronger. Gragas itemization is kind of weird at the moment. So in the past, Gragas really just liked CDR, but now CDR is kind of hard to come by. So I saw some people doing like Seraphs into Storm Surge just so you get a bit of CDR at the start, but in my opinion, it's not that good. I'm kind of a fan of Chapter Storm Surge into Shadow Flame. I think this is a really good build on pretty much every AP mana champ at the moment. Obviously, it's giving you a bit of mana and a bit of CDR without having to upgrade the item, which I think is good. Alternatively, you can go for Protobelt builds. I actually don't think it's as good. I'm pretty sure just going Storm Surge Shadow Flame for the full burst with that chapter is the best. That being said, obviously you can go for something like this. The problem is it delays any other situational items, so your Zhonya's or your Death Cap or whatever is going to be a while off, but on your 3-item spike, you know, this is going to be pretty big spikes every step of the way, and except for maybe the first item, like Protobelt, you're going to get it early, but it doesn't feel amazing when you pick it up. I think after the nerf probably isn't as good. I would just stick to Chapter Stormsword Shadowflame. Graves is all about lethality at the moment, and you can build pretty much whatever ones you want. So obviously very strong lethality items. Ghostblade is good, Voltaic is good, Opportunity is good, and Hubris is good as well. So I've seen like Opportunity into Hubris, I've seen Ghostblade into Voltaic. Obviously there's all these ones with Collector here, so I'm not totally sure which one's the best. I'm a pretty big fan of that Opportunity as a Hubris build that Canyon did, and you know, obviously Canyon's kind of a beast, so I would go for that. Alternatively, though, I think, honestly, as long as you're fitting in items like Ghostblade and Voltaic or Opportunity into your build, it's going to look pretty good most of the time. So for Gwen's core items, you're obviously just going Riftmaker and Nash's. You can do this the other way around, so you can do like Nash's Riftmaker if you really want to play for 1v1 and you're not worried too much about the health or anything. Overall, though, this is the safest. And then for third item, you probably want, I would say, Cosmic Rabadon or Zhonya. I think going for Shadowflame third isn't as great, but you can go something like, you know, Riftmaker and Nash's Rabadons and then Shadowflame, or then Cosmic, or then Zhonya. Really just depends. At that point, you're really just getting situational with your AP items, but your core 2 items are always going to be these ones, and these are by far the most important. There are several Hecarim builds, so the one that is most common, at least on OPGG, is Triforce Shojin Cleaver, and in my opinion, this isn't great. So I'm a bigger fan of going either Sundered Sky into Shojin or going Eclipse into Shojin, and I think while Cleaver is good, it's not required. You can build other Bruiser items as well. So I would actually recommend going for one of these ones down here. Again, either the Sundered Sky into Shojin, or you can go Shojin Eclipse. You can go Eclipse Shojin, and then other items after that. You can still build Cleaver, obviously. I just don't think it's as core to the build as it was before. For Laneheimer, I'm 90% sure that you should just be going Liandry's Rylai's, so I think a mana item is a bad idea. You still need a little bit of mana though, so you can either do Chapter Liandry's Rylai's or you can do Tier Chapter Rylai's. I think Chapter Liandry's Rylai's is better. It means that you can upgrade that Chapter item into something later on, but personally I think the Luden's builds are pretty bad and I would advise against it. I think it really is just you're trying to get your Liandry's and Rylai's online as quick as you possibly can. Weiya's got some pretty different builds. I wouldn't really recommend going for anything here. So you're a couple different builds. You have a CDR build where you can go Seraphs and Cosmic, or even Seraphs Morello, and that can give you a lot of ability haste, allows you to control the fights really well. Alternatively, if you really want to just deal with tanks and kind of just come online damage-wise earlier, you can go something like Chapter into Liandry's. You can even go Tier into Liandry's and just upgrade your Seraphs later. I think getting Liandry's early on this champ is very, very useful, and I don't think the burst builds are very good on this champ. I really think you should be going either a CDR build or a DPS build, so I would recommend staying away from these and going for one of those instead. Allowing most common builds are just the Cleaver Iceborne or the Iceborne Cleaver. Now, I have seen a lot of success with Sundered Sky. Again, I think this item is really, really OP. So I'm kind of a fan of this build here of going Iceborne, Sundered Sky, and then, you know, you can go either Shojin or you can go other Bruiser items here. So I think, again, you're trying to, like, replace a lot of the time, like, stuff like Cleaver with Sundered Sky just because it's a much stronger item. Can you build a Cleaver? Like, definitely, you can still build it later on if you need it. But I think this build here feels really, really good. Aurelia's best build is this one here, where you go Borg Sundered Sky into Hexplate. You can drop the Hexplate for a different situation or item, something like with a Wit's End can be very, very valuable. After this, you pretty much just want to round it out with tank items. You can build a bit more damage, you know, you could drop in something like a Terminus, but I don't think it's as good. I think you just get your core damage items and then start to build full tank after that, and you're going to be an absolute menace to deal with. Ivern pretty much always rushes Moonstone. You can go Shirelli instead, but I think Moonstone is a better item, and after that, you just go into situational. So obviously, if you have a lot of like ADC sort of champs on your team, the Arm Sensor is really nice. The Staff of Flowing Water is great for AP champs, or if you just want to give your team movement speed, you can buy something like a Mikhail against certain comps. Obviously, Redemption is kind of just an all-round option, but yeah, pretty much it's always going to be Moonstone. You can't really go wrong with that, and then look for some situational item based on what comp you have around you. Also important to factor in what your support is building, right? Like, you don't want to double up on the Arm Sensor proc most of the time. If your support's going on, you would want to go like Staff or Redemption or something, so keep that in mind. But yeah, these builds will work for you pretty well. Janna is a champ that I've seen use a variety of support items. So obviously the Dreammaker, I think it's called, is quite good in her. You can go Celestial if you're really worried about getting one shot, but I'd actually say Janna is pretty difficult to kill anyway, so I probably wouldn't go for it. I've also seen people go for Realm Spike for damage. I don't think it's great, but it's something you consider. Bloodsong obviously can be picked up just because it's kind of an OP item, but I think Dreammaker is your best overall. And then it really is just standard support items based off what you need. Obviously, the Shirelias is kind of a go-to for the Janna a lot of the time, and the Ardent, especially with the type of champs you'll be playing with Janet alongside makes sense a lot of the time. But if you're playing with like a Lethality AD or something instead, you might want to go for something else. So obviously just Redemption, Staff of Flowing Water. You can even go for Dawn Core later in the build, can be good. It's not too different from Janet in the past, and yeah, shouldn't come as much as a surprise. Jax has a variety of different builds, and by far the most common is just Triforce, Sundered Sky into Shojin. Some other things I have seen is just going Titanic Hydra into Triforce, and then, building from then on. I've also just seen a straight Titanic Hydra into tank items, just because it allows you to just be an absolute tank for your team and not need to wait so long to kind of be a team fighter, as opposed to just kind of like looking for small skirmishes or split push. So I'm kind of the opinion that both Titanic and Sundered Sky are great items. So, pretty much whichever path you're going for is going to be fine. If you're not sure, probably just go for this build here. But I think there is a bit of room for min-maxing depending on your matchup and depending on the game. Jace is another champ with a lot of options. So in 90% of your builds, you're just going to be going for a tier and then a lethality item of your choice. So this can be Hubris, it can be Ghostblade, it can be Opportunity. Then you'll be going a Manamune into a Cyrilda afterwards. That's kind of your standard build. Some other things you can change, though, is you can delay your Manamune to third. So you could do something like, let's say, Tier, Ghostblade, Opportunity, then Manamune, right? That gives you more lethality, it gives you stronger spikes early. But it does mean that once those, stronger kind of armor items come in later, that either your Cleaver or your Cyrildas is going to be delayed, which can be kind of a problem. Another thing you can do is you can go for the Eclipse, so drop a lethality item, and this makes you a bit more beefier, able to deal with some of those stronger, tankier targets, but not as good against the squishies. What do I think is the best overall? I'm kind of the opinion that just going, again, tier lethality item, Manamune Cyrilda is the best. I like Hubris, or first item, if I'm snowballing. Otherwise, I kind of think Opportunity is actually the best. So I really like tier Opportunity, Manamune, Cyrilda. I think that's what I like to go for the most at the moment. But again, lots of room for mix and matching on this champ. Gen, you kind of have to choose if you're going 2 lethality items, 3 lethality items, or if you're just going straight crits. The straight crit build, the Stormrazor, i.e. RFC, is pretty strong pretty much all the time, so you can never really go wrong with it. It seems, though, at least in Hilo, that the double or even triple lethality builds are better. So you can go something like Ghostblade and then like Opportunity or Hubris second, and then you can go RFC third, or you can actually go another lethality item. So you could even go something like, Youmuu's Hubris and Opportunity before building other crit items after that. It really depends, like, one, how ahead you are, and two, kind of how tanky the enemy team is. I think lethality Jhin builds look really, really strong at the moment, but if you're not really sure, it's probably safer to build crit. But I'm a big fan of lethality Jhin builds at the moment. On Jinx, there really isn't much wiggle room. I think you should just be going Kraken, i.e. into situation items pretty much all the time. So RFC for range, BT for lifesteal, LDR for armor pen. Runans is very, very good just for actual AoE DPS. PD is good. I think it's a bit harder to buy than the other ones because a lot of the time you would just need one of these, whereas PD feels like a bit more of a luxury item. But yeah, you're going to start with Kraken IE, and then it's just pretty much typical ADC itemization from then on. K'Sante pretty much just gets to choose whichever tank items he wants. So obviously Iceborne is always a great item on him, so I'd recommend picking that up. Jackshow, again, really good on pretty much every tank at the moment, especially later in the build. So that can be something you look at. And then for your second item, I mean, it can depend a little bit on what you're laning against, right? Like if you're laning against an AP champ, it can be a good idea to go Hollow Radiance before your Iceborne. Obviously, if you're rushing out Iceborne, you might find that you need Magic Resist after your first item. If they're really heavy on AD, then you can kind of skip the Magic Resist and go for something like a Sunfire or even the Unending Despair as your second item. So again, you're just really making use of the OP tank items, and all that's really changing is the order in which you build them. Kai'Sa is another one of those champs that tends to just build whatever the hell she wants. I think most of the time you want to be going Kraken, Terminus, and then either Rageblade, Navori, or sometimes even Wit's End. If you do need more AP on your team, you can go the Stormrazor Rageblade Nasher build. Personally, though, I kind of am a bigger fan just of these builds in general. But if you really end up being like, okay, your team is full AD and you need to be like a hard AP champ, that's the way you can do it. But you deal a fair amount of mixed damage, and obviously you can pick up AP items past this point if you want. There's nothing wrong with slotting in a Nashers or something in here as well. So yeah, look out for those builds for sure. On Kalista, I think by far the best build, if you can get away with it, is just Bork, Rageblade, Terminus, Jackshow. I think that makes you absolutely unkillable and you deal a ton of damage. You can drop the Terminus for a Wit's End if you want, and that gets you your magic resist earlier rather than waiting for a full another item. Also, it can be a little bit easier to stack. Obviously, you do need some time of hitting targets with the Terminus to really stack it up. So it's something you could look for. But again, I really do just think this build here with the Jackshow is the best, and you should be looking for that almost every single game. Karma can be played in a couple different roles as well. So for support, you kind of have to decide if you're going to play utility or damage. So if you're playing utility, you can go for Dreammaker, and then you're looking for probably rushing like Shrelia into Arden or Shrelia into Staff of Flowing Water. Now, if you want to go for more damage, you can go for Realm Spike, and you can actually go for Mandate first. So you can go something like Mandate, Shrelia, or you can even just drop the Shrelia altogether, go like Mandate into Staff of Flowing Water, whatever you really want there. If you're playing Karma mid, I'm pretty sure you want to just go Malignant into Mandate and then CDR items. So you can go like Cosmic, you can grab a Crypt Bloom, you can go Morello if you want to. Basically, just get those 2 core items of Malignance and the Mandate, and then just build situational CDR items after that, maybe fit in a Death Cap really late in the build. For Kha'Zix jungle, you're pretty much always going Malignance into a situational item, so generally it's just going to be, if you're against tankier targets, or if you're not sure what to buy, it should probably just be Liandry's. You can go Shadow Flame for more burst, but I kind of think Liandry's is a better item overall, and it also performs really, really well in team fights. Now, if you want to play Kha'Zix in a lane, like you want to play Kha'Zix bot or you want to play Kha'Zix mid, I actually think it's pretty good with Liandry builds. So you can do something like Liandry Riftmaker Rabadon. You can do even Roa Liandry Rabadon, I think could be good as well. Just Liandry, I think, is a really good item on Kha'Zix in general. So if you can find a way to fit it in, it is good. You could go Malignance as a laning Kha'Zix, but I don't think it's really like playing into your strengths. And I also think laning Kha'Zix, especially mid lane Kha'Zix, really suffers from, you know, having a difficult laning phase. So building no HP early is probably kind of rough, so be a bit careful of that. Overall, though, Kha'Zix is mainly a jungler, and again, look for those Malignants into situational item builds. Kassadin has a couple key builds, and it kind of depends just on where you want to spike. So if you want the absolute best scaling build, you want to go Tier, Roa, Seraphs, and then either Death Cap or Lich Bane. So you can go Lich Bane, then Death Cap, you could go Death Cap, then Lich Bane. That's like overall the highest damage build. Now, in my opinion, if you want an earlier spike, you can drop Rod of Ages and go on Malignance instead. So you could do something like Tier, Malignant, Seraphs. I probably would never pick up Malignance with Rod of Ages, and the reason is it would just delay other items. Like, if you're buying both of these, that means we're either delaying, like, the Rabadons or the buff Death Cap, or sorry, the Rabadons or the buff Lich Bane, or even a Void Staff. They're super late in the game, and we're maybe even locking ourselves out of the Zhonya's. So in my mind, it really is just Malignance or Roa, and it's depending on, do I have time to scale, or do I really need to fight early? That's kind of up to you, and it can even be up to your playstyle. You know, like some people like to play, say, Electrocute Ignite Kassadin. I think you definitely go Malignance with that. Whereas if you're playing like Conqueror or First Strike, you're playing full scaling, I think you'd be going towards the Rod of Ages Seraphs build. Katarina builds, I think it's just Nashes into Storm Surge pretty much every game at the moment. After that, you can go Shadow Flame just for more damage. If you need a bit more survivability, Zhonya's can be an option, but really Katarina is just about these 2 core items at the moment. Obviously, they're both very, very strong, so try and rush these out as quickly as you can. KO can be a little dependent on what damage type you need, so if you're going AP, the best build is generally just going to be Nash's Riftmaker into Rabadons, or Nash's Riftmaker into Wit's End and then Rabadons. If you need a bit more AD damage, or maybe even a bit more tankiness later on, you can do the build where you're going Kraken, Rageblade, Terminus, Jackshow, or you can go, you know, Kraken, Rageblade, Terminus, Wit's End. Something like that works as well. I think the AP build is a bit better overall, but you know, with the tankiness provided from this build, you might find it a little bit easier to play, especially around this point when you're picking up a tank item. So that's something you can experiment with. I definitely prefer the AP build though. Kayn is a bit of a difficult one because he's got a couple different forms. So we'll talk about blue form first. So most people that I've been seeing playing Kayn tend to prefer Profane Hydra just for the ability to clear even quicker. So I've seen that both with and without tier. So an example would be something like Tier, Profane Hydra, Manamune, Hubris. I think that's a build you can do. You can also just do straight Profane Hydra and Hubris, or you can do other items like Ghostblade and Opportunity for just running around the map quicker. Obviously, it means you'll be a bit less efficient with the clearing, but you'll also be much better moving around the map. So I think there's a lot of different lethality options and different takes on the blue Kayn build. For the red Kayn builds, what I would recommend is probably going Sundered Sky into Shojin. Another thing you can try is you can do Eclipse into Shojin instead, but I think grabbing Shojin as your second item is really, really good, and I would generally recommend delaying your cleaver in order to pick up your Shojin second. Cannon builds are very, very simple. You want to be going Protobelt into Storm Surge. After that, if you can get away with going more damage, you should go for a Shadow Flame. That being said, in order to survive the extreme amount of burst at the moment, a lot of the time going third item Zhonya's can be good. Sometimes you can go Zhonya's second, so like Rockabelt Zhonya, but the problem with that is it delays Storm Surge, and Storm Surge is a snowbally item anyway, so like getting it later is generally not good. I would just recommend going these 2 items, and then kind of looking situationally after that and seeing what you need, and then later on just round out your build with, you know, stuff like Rabadons or Void or Banshees or whatever we really need here. Kha'Zix is another lethality jungler with a billion different options. Now, one thing I will quickly say is the 2 lethality items that recently got buffed, that's Profane Hydra and Hubris. If you're building one of those, you should probably build it first. So Profane Hydra, again, very good for efficiency. You can go, say, Profane Hydra into Voltaic, into Ghostblade. That works fine. You can go Hubris into Voltaic Ghostblade, for example, but you probably don't want to be building those items second. So I don't think you should go, say, Voltaic into Hydra or, Voltaic into Hubris. I think you really do want them earlier. Otherwise, though, I mean, Voltaic and Ghostblade are just very, very strong items on Kha'Zix in general. I think especially Voltaic is a really, really OP item at the moment, so something you should look for. Edge of Night can be quite good just for helping you survive later on, so obviously an item that you always need to think about as well. But I think on this champ, really, it's still pretty open. There's a lot of different builds. They all seem pretty good. You can kind of adapt it to your style a little bit. Just, again, make sure that you're not rushing some of the... Or if you are... Certain items on this champ need to be rushed. Again, the Profane, Hydra, and the Hubris. If you're not building them, obviously you don't need to worry, but if you are building them, make sure you get them first. For the Kindred jungle builds, I would recommend one of these ones, the Kraken Triforce Terminus or the Kraken Triforce Wits End, just depending on what you need here. I would probably stay away from Kraken Terminus Wits. I don't think it's as good on Kindred, and I think it spikes quite late in the game, which, as a jungler that kind of doesn't need to snowball, but she definitely can't fall behind, I think delaying items too late in the game can be a problem, so I just recommend one of these top two here. So for Kled's best build, I think Titanic Sundered Sky is very good. I think you can also go Eclipse into Titanic, which feels really good. Titanic Sundered Sky into Cleaver feels kind of good. I would not go Cleaver second most of the time. I think it's better to either have an Eclipse before your Titanic or have a Sundered Sky before your Cleaver. I think they're just better items overall. Cleaver's not bad, but I think it just needs to be a little later in the build. So overall, Titanic is basically your core item, and then you're kind of thinking, what things we want around that. Is it like Eclipse, Titanic, Sterak's, Eclipse, Titanic, Sundered Sky, just straight Titanic, Sundered Sky? I think these are all pretty good. You can just choose depending on your matchup. And honestly, like, all the items are pretty OP that you probably can't go wrong with it. Kog'Maw is primarily played on here at the moment, and I think Bork, Rageblade, Terminus, Jackshow is the best build. Obviously, this can be a Wits End third as well if you want. If you're going to play AP Cog instead, you're probably building Seraph, Shadowflame, Rylai's or something like that, but I don't think it's that worth playing AP Cog unless maybe you're playing it mid, just because overall the on-hit Cog build is so strong at the moment. LeBlanc has two builds, which are AP and AD. So for the AD build, you want to be going Shiv, Voltaic, Triforce, and then Stormrazor. I think AD LeBlanc is still quite good in certain matchups, so stuff like Kassadin or Vex are very good AD LeBlanc matchups where they're quite hard for AP LeBlanc. Now, if you are playing AP LeBlanc, what I would recommend is going Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadowflame, and then what you can do is you can upgrade to Rabadons after. You can sit on your Chapter pretty much your entire build. If you're going to upgrade your Chapter late game, it should probably be into Malignance, just because it gives you the ultimate ability haste. Like, don't worry about the Hate Fog passive. I think Malignance is just a better item overall than Ludens, so that's what I would recommend for AP LeBlanc. If you really want to rush a mana item first, it probably is Ludens, but again, I think if you are playing AP LeBlanc, Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadowflame, Rabadons, and then later upgrade to Malignance is better. Lee Sin jungle builds, so Sundered Sky is definitely your core, and after that you have some choices. So if you're snowballing, you can go for Shojin. You can also go for Eclipse second, which is pretty nice. Obviously, Sundered Sky Cleaver is kind of the go-to. And then for the rest of the build, it really is just situational bruiser items, so Shojin is really good. More can be good. This can also just be a tank MR item, like a Kanik or something. Sterak's Death Dance, of course, continue to be pretty decent items. So yeah, you kind of have to experiment a little bit, but you always want to start with Sundered Sky. Incredibly OP item at the moment. Leona chooses between Celestial or Bloodsong for her support item, and then after that, you have a lot of options like the other tank supports. You've got Locket, Trailblazer, Zeke's, Knight's Vow. Even a Frozen Heart against heavy AD comps can be very, very good in the early game. Which one is actually best really depends on the game, but they're all very solid options, so just take a look at the enemy comp and you can kind of choose which one's best from there. On Lilia, we're always going Liaris and Riftmaker as our first two items. After that, though, it's kind of up for debate. So Zhonya's third is pretty good. In my opinion, Rylai's third is good, but I think Cosmic third might actually be better. But you can, of course, go Rylai's into Cosmic. You can also go Cosmic into Rylai's. I think you do want both of them eventually, and they synergize very well with the Riftmaker. But as long as you're picking up these items, these two items first, you can't really go wrong. On Lissandra, pretty much everyone has been going for Malignance first. Now, I'm not too sold on this. I think Malignance could be a bait on Lissandra. While the ability haste is nice and the Hate Fog does work fairly well on her, I think being this squishy feels kind of bad. So there's a couple other builds that I think you should try, and in my opinion are better. I really like Rockabelt into Storm Surge or Rockabelt into Storm Surge Zhonya. I think you can get enough mana through your runes to fund this, and it makes you a lot tankier while also, skipping this item overall. Other things you can try is you can just go the burst build that other champs are doing. So rather than completing the Malignance, just going, say, Chapter Storm Surge Shadowflame or Chapter Storm Surge Zhonya, I think that can work too. Overall, I'm just really not a huge fan of Malignance, although admittedly it's pretty good on Lissandra. Is there anything else you could try? I think you can do Rod of Ages in certain matchups. You can do something like Rod of Ages into Zhonya, which makes you incredibly tanky. The problem is you're not getting any ability haste, so does it feel that great? Probably not, and I think the Roa's giving you enough tankiness already. I think Roa into Liandry actually might not be too bad, but it's not something I've tested a lot. Overall, though, I think Lysandra builds haven't been too figured out. I think it's one of the champs that is still kind of lacking, but in my mind, finding a way to use Rocket Belt is good because it's a great item on Lysandra for covering the distance, it's relatively cheap, and gives you the tankiness you need. Lucian has two builds, the first of which is the Kraken Navori Rapid Fire. This is just your stock standard Lucian build. Now, something you see a lot in bot lane, particularly when it's paired with Nami, the Lucian Nami combo is Voltaic, Storm Razor, and Rapid Fire. This gives a ton of burst, a ton of damage, and works very well with Nami. I think if you're paired with any other support, though, you might want to look for this. That being said, like, Voltaic is a strong enough item that you probably could just rush it anyway, even without that. So I kind of think, like, at least for me, what I'm doing is just this when I'm on my own and this one here when I'm with Nami, but it's something you can experiment with. And I think if you go on Pro Builds or Games of Legends, you'll probably see a lot of different Lucian builds at the moment. And they're all, you know, fairly strong, I think. Lulu's build at the moment is to go Dreammaker as your support item, and then most likely you will be rushing out an Ardent. I think Ardent is really good with the types of champs you normally pair Lulu with. You can go for a Shirelli second. I think Shirelli is still very strong a lot of the time, but in my opinion, Ardent is that better rush. If you're playing Lulu mid, I think you probably want a CDR-focused build, like maybe something like Seraphs into Cosmic, or maybe you even do something like Seraphs into Ardent. There could even be a Lich Bane in the build, so I'm pretty sure Lulu mid is viable. I'm just not totally sure on the build right now. You're probably better off checking to see if anyone else has played it, although obviously she is mostly played as a support at the moment. Lux can be played in a couple different roles, also has a lot of different builds. So if you're playing Lux support, most of the ones I've seen go for Realm Spike into Storm Surge, and then they go for cheaper AP items. Stuff like Morello or Cryptbloom can be quite good. If you're playing Lux mid, there's also a ton of things. So for the Lux one tricks that I've seen, most of them don't go Ludens. They instead go tier Horizon Seraphs, or sometimes tier Horizon Storm Surge Seraphs can be quite good. There's also something I saw on Twitter today by Yozu, so I'll link this tweet in the description as well, which is Tank Lux. I've got to be honest, I have no idea if this is good or not. I've not tried it, I've not seen it, but it's something you guys could definitely think about. And I'd recommend checking out Yozu to get more information on this build. Malphite, one of those tanks that really is just building the tank items, so most of the time you're going to be going something like Sunfire or Frozen Heart as your first rush. If you're against AP, you can go for Hollow Radiance, and then you really do want to be building other, you know, OP tank items, stuff like Unending Despair, good versus AD. Jackshow, just good again for the mega tanks a bit later in the build. Kanik, obviously an extremely good item if you need even more magic resist. So pretty much it just comes down to what are you rushing first, and most of the time, again, it's like Frozen Heart, Sunfire, or Hollow Radiance on this champ, and then you kind of build situational tank items from then on. Almost everyone on Malzahar goes for this build here, which is Malignance, Liandry's, Rylai's, and I'm pretty sure again that this build is a bait. So I think that you want to instead go for either Chapter Liandry's, Rylai's, or you want to go for Tier Liandry's, Rylai's. So I think getting this item quicker is definitely better. I think Malignance does not do a hell of a lot of damage. Actually, it does pretty much no damage. Like if you hold shift over it at the end of the game, it's done very little. Even on a champ like Mal's, it can make them stay inside it. And I think Mal's ult is not an ability that gets used on cooldown. So I think Malignance is kind of a bait. That being said, I really like sitting on the chapter. So like Chapter Liandry, Rylai's Deathcap, or, you know, Chapter Liandry's, Rylai's Deathcap, and then maybe you go Malignance here. Or if you went a tier instead of a chapter, that's when you could upgrade to your Seraphs or something. I like the chapter better though. I think it really is though just trying to get this Liandry's and Rylai's out as quick as you can. And in my mind, buying the full Malignance is probably a waste. Maokai has a variety of roles you can be played in. For support, you'll be going Celestial with Trailblazer, and then you can kind of choose from there. You know, Lockets, Nice Valve, Frozen Heart, Abyssal Mask, all can be pretty decent on this champ. If you're playing a top or jungle Maokai, most likely you would just be looking for the standard tank items, as many of the other tanks do. The only difference being that you should try find a time to fit a Liandry's in your build. I don't think you want to build it super early, but for any AP tank, it's really, really nice if they can pick up a Liandry at some point, because Liandry is such a high damage item for just a single slot, right? Like if you're, say, a 4-item tank, you could just replace, you know, one of those tank items and double your damage, essentially. So I really like picking up Liandry's as a 3rd, 4th, even 5th or 6th item as an AP tank, and it can be really, really nice. But before then, again, just be looking for those standard tank items, stuff like Hollow Radiance, Sunfire, Frozen Heart, Unending Despair. These are kind of the king tank items at the moment, and obviously Jackshow, not listed here, is another very good tank item to pick up later in the game. So when I was looking into Master Yi, I saw obviously there was a lot of Bork Hexplate, but most of the one tricks I looked at actually decided that Bork Terminus Rageblade Jackshow was better. So they were kind of deciding that it was better to get the, you know, tankier stats from other sources than the Hexplate. So I'm not totally sure, to be honest with you. Like, Yi is a champ that isn't played a whole lot. It's really just exclusively by one tricks. I think Bork Hexplate seems good and is probably the strongest second item spike. I think as you go later in the game, you know, Bork Rageblade, or Bork Terminus Rageblade Wits, or Bork Terminus with, you know, whatever kind of combination here, and I think eventually ending in a Jack Show, that's probably the best build for going later in the game. But I think on those 2 item spikes, the Bork Hexplate is probably better. Milio will of course be picking up Dreammaker as a support item. Now, one thing not listed on any of the builds here is that most Milios I saw actually rushed out Moonstone before they went for Shurelias. So I saw a lot of like Moonstone Ardent Shurelias. I saw a lot of just Moonstone Shurelias, but I think Moonstone seems to be the core rush a lot of the time. Obviously, you can still rush Shurelias, but yeah, again, like the Moonstone, if you go on Pro Builds and you look at Milio, a lot of the first item just being picked up there is that Moonstone, so definitely something to look at. Obviously, from then, it really is just situational support items. Same with the rest of the Enchanter supports. For Misfortune, a lot is dependent on how many lethality items you want before you pick up your Infinity Edge. So it's generally just 1 or 2. You know, you can go something like Ghostblade Collector IE. You can go like Ghostblade Hubris Collector IE. You can even do just like Ghostblade Hubris IE and skip the Collector altogether and build crit from then on. But yeah, it really just depends like which lethality items you want, which ones you value. In my opinion, the best lethality items for MF are Ghostblade and Hubris. Collector is good, obviously, because it gives crit, and so that can kind of speed up your IE spike. But really, you just got to kind of decide. I probably wouldn't do something like this, where you're going like Serilda's third. In my mind, at this point, it should already be you're moving towards crit if you're going this way. You know, go something like an IE and then an LDR. But yeah, feel free to mix and match. I think this is a champ, again, with a lot of different viable lethality builds, and all the lethality items are pretty strong at the moment, so you can't go too wrong. Mordekaiser has 3 core items, which are Rylai's, Riftmaker, and Liandry, and it really just comes down to which order do you want to rush them in. So Liandry's is definitely your highest damage option, but sometimes if you're against a range champ or champs that are difficult to pin down, you might want to rush out of Rylai's instead. So I think you normally want to go, if you don't need the Rylai's slow early, then you want to go Liandry's, Riftmaker, Rylai's. But if you do need the slow early, then you want to go Rylai's, Liandry's, Riftmaker. So it really just, I think it's this build here or this build here, mainly dependent on, are you against a range champ that's going to cut you around, or are you against a melee champ that is just going to be fighting you the whole time and you just want like the maximum damage possible. I think after you get these 3 core items, you know, stuff like Nash's can be good, Zhonya's, Death Cap, Cosmic for movement speed. There's lots of different items you can get, but these are always going to be your 3 core, and you need to pick these up all the time. Morgana goes Realm Spike as a support item, and then you can either go Liandry's Zhonya, or you can go Liandry's Rylai. So Liandry's Rylai means you're more of like a nuisance, you poke from range a little bit more, whereas Liandry's Zhonya allows you to flash in the enemy team and ult them. So that can depend a little bit on what sort of champs you're against. I'm more of a fan, honestly, of Liandry's Rylai. I think it's actually just stronger overall. But definitely for playmaking potential, Liandry's Zhonya's has higher highs. Obviously, if you can get all 3 of these items, it's very good, but, you know, they're not expensive. It's just, like, as a support, you're not getting a lot of income. Morello can be a really good item, too, if your team does need healing cut, because it's very, very cheap and actually gives pretty good stats, so that's something you should look out for as well. Neferi has been kind of struggling lately, and I think part of that is the builds that people have been going. So in my mind, the best Neferi build is to go Eclipse, a lethality item, and then either Sterilda's or Cleaver, and then probably a Shojin after. So the build might look like Eclipse, Opportunity, Cleaver, Shojin. That could be a build, right? I think Profane Hydra is honestly kind of overrated on this champion. I think Voltaic is good, but it leaves you too squishy. Edge of Night, I think, is still a good champ, or a good item. Serilda's is pretty good, but the problem is it's like, it got nerfed so much from before, but it's still a great item. Again, I think it should always start with Eclipse and then a lethality item of your choice. So that can be Voltaic, it can be Opportunity. Honestly, it probably even could be Edge of Night, although you might be too tanky and lack, you know, yeah, you might lack damage if you do that. And then, yeah, third item, you're choosing between Serilda or Cleaver. Cleaver makes you tankier, Serilda makes you damage. And then Shojin after that, I think, can be kind of nice. Or you can even go more lethality items. Stuff like Opportunity can be picked up. Edge of Night if you don't already have it, stuff like that. On Nami, your support item is going to be Dreammaker most of the time. You can go Rift Spike if you really, really want it, but I don't think it's as good. Your first item will always be Mandate, and I think your second item most of the time should be Ardent. If you're with us with an ADC or a team, I guess it doesn't use the Ardent, stuff like Shurelias or Staff can be good second items. After that, I mean, we can look for some of these cheaper support items like Morello, Mikhail. I think Dawn Core is also pretty good on Nami, so that can be something you think about. But really, I think it's the Dreammaker, Mandate, and the Ardent, which are your core build. NASA's builds are pretty easy. Pretty much everyone just goes Triforce, Frozen Heart. Although if you're versus an AP champ, you can of course go Triforce, Spirit Visage, Frozen Heart. If you're really greedy, you could fit in a Sundered Sky somewhere. The thing is though, most of the time, NASA's needs like tank stats more than he needs extra damage. So it can be kind of hard, I think, to fit it in second, but possibly you can fit it in third. Like if you're against a very heavy AD team, you know, just sitting on your Frozen Heart, not worrying about your Visage, just grabbing this third and then like a Jack-Show fourth, I think that can be really good. But definitely don't greedy the tank items. I think it's better to be tankier than to be super squishy on Nasus, because once the kind of mid to late game rolls around, it can be really, really hard to do anything if you're just, you know, fall over in a couple seconds. Like most other tank supports, Nautilus will be rushing either Bloodsong or Celestial and then kind of picking up tank items as you need them. So Locket, Zeke's, Trailblazer are all good. I've also seen first item Frozen Heart. I think that's pretty underrated. If the enemy team is very heavy on AD, I think first item Frozen Heart does go a pretty long way. Otherwise, of course, you know, just the standard Locket and Trailblazer and stuff are all good. For Neeko, the best build is to just go Protobelt Storm Surge into Zhonya's. I think it's pretty hard to go Zhonya's second. You just end up lacking a lot of damage and a lot of other stats. After this, you go for something like a Death Cap and you end up dealing quite a lot of damage. Should you fit a Shadow Flame in your build? I think, honestly, not normally. Like, it does give you a lot of damage, but not having the Zhonya's on Neeko is normally pretty bad. I guess if you're really ahead and you're really greedy, you can just do this build here. But I honestly think this build, the most common one here, is the best build on Neeko. Nidalee, people have been experimenting with a couple different Nidalee builds. So there's the Storm Surge Shadow Flame, which is just a huge burst build. There's also the Rockabelt Storm Surge Shadow Flame build, which gives you the ability to close the gap a bit easier, makes you a little bit tankier. I'm not sold on Rockabelt on this champ though, and the build I actually think is the best is to go Lichbane into Storm Surge. I think that gives you the combination of a lot of damage while also giving you the movement speed, which will make up for not having the Rockabelt active. So I'm kind of a fan of going, again, yeah, Lichbane, Storm Surge, and then either Shadow Flame or Zhonya from then on, or even, you know, Death Cap and other items. I think Protobelt is kind of a bait, although, you know, I have to say that it is being bought a lot, so there's probably something to it. But I'm pretty sure Lichbane is, you know, underrated as a first item, and it synergizes very well with the Storm Surge, and you can then build situational IEP items from then on. Nilah at the moment has an extremely strong build, which is probably going to get nerfed, and that's the Bloodsong Nilah build. So you're better off just pausing and reading this, and again, I will link this tweet in the description so you guys can go and, you know, figure out more about it. I think eventually this will get nerfed and it won't be as OP, but, you know, for now, this is basically what people are using. Once this gets nerfed, though, I imagine it's going to be mostly Collector Navori. I think that's overall this is going to be your normal build on Nilah. It's just right now this is really out of line. So once this gets nerfed, or if you're viewing this in the future, you probably want to build these, which is just, you know, Collector Navori, and then you can go stuff like BT, Shield Bow, LDR, you know, pretty much whatever you need situationally in order to survive. Nocturne at the moment is going Hexplate into off-tank or even full tank after, so, you know, stuff like Hexplate into Eclipse is good, Hexplate into Cleaver is solid, Hexplate into Stridebreaker. I've even just seen, you know, straight Hexplate into Frozen Heart or something like that. So I'd probably recommend a build like this. I think Hexplate and Eclipse is a really good combo, especially if you don't need the Stridebreaker. Hexplate, Eclipse, and then you can go Cleaver if you want it. Otherwise, I think items like Sterak's might be better. And then from then on, you can actually just go into the full tank, so stuff like Frozen Heart or Kanek, Hollow, etc. can all be very good at that point. Nunu jungle most of the time will be tank, and again, you can just go the tank items, so something like Sunfire or Hollow Radiance into, you know, Frozen Heart, Kanek, Jack-Show, like these are all good items. You can pick up a Liandry's later in the build, but I would really recommend against buying it first. I think you want it, you know, later on after you get some of your tank items. If you want to play AP Nunu, like an absolute Giga Chad, I think you want Rocket Belt into Storm Surge and then probably just Shadow Flame or Death Cap. I'm not totally sure what the best order would be. I think it's definitely Rocket Belt Storm Surge to begin with, though. And then you can kind of decide, like, I think Zhonya's, Shadow Flame, or Rabadon's are all decent options from there. But overall, I do believe the tank build is better. I think the Olaf build is not very solved at the moment. So Hexplate is really strong, and you definitely want it in the build somewhere. But where you pick it up is kind of up to you. So some people go like Hexplate into Stridebreaker, which I think can be really good. Although a lot of the time, if you need Stridebreaker, it feels like you need it early, and then you kind of have to delay your Hexplate. You can also go something like Hexplate into Triforce, or you can go, you know, Ravenous into Hexplate. I'm honestly not too sure what the overall best build on Olaf is, other than I'm like, you know, 100% sure it contains a Hexplate. As for which way you go around it, I mean, I guess it's like Stridebreaker if you're against ranged champs a lot of the time. Maybe if you're just beating on a melee champ, you want to go like Ravenous into Hexplate instead, and skip the Stridebreaker completely. So you're going to have to mix and match a little bit. I think Triforce also could maybe be a bait. I think it might just be better to, you know, kind of rely on your huge attack speed steroid and just kind of beat people down with this. So maybe something like, yeah, maybe like Stridebreaker, Hexplate, Sterak's, or Ravenous, Hexplate, Sterak's. I think those might be the best. In my opinion, Orianna is definitely its Seraph's user. So I think you want to be going Seraph's, Storm Surge, Rabadons if you're against squishy champs, or you want to be going Seraph's, Liandry's, Rabadons, or, you know, maybe Void if you need it against those tankier teams. That second item slot can be a defensive items as well. Like if you need, say, Seraph's Banshees against, a bunch of assassins, or if you want Seraph's Zhonya's, that can be an option too. But it is a pretty big DPS loss in both cases. Like they gave a lot of AP to these defensive items, but the problem is the offensive items are still so strong. So yeah, I'd really recommend going Seraph's. I think Luden's is kind of a bait on this champ, and then yeah, really choosing between Storm Surge or defensive item, or Liandry's as our second option. Ornn, most of the time, we'll be going Jak'Sho third. That's very important in the build, because this will be the item that you upgrade, and it's absolutely broken. Before then, though, you're just buying tank items depending on your lane. So if we want double armor, for example, we can go Sunfire and Unending Despair into Jak'Sho. If we want double magic resist, we could go like Hollow Radiance and Kaenic into Jak'Sho. If we need a bit of both, obviously we can mix and match. Like, do we want Sunfire into Hollow? Do we want Hollow into Unending? We've got lots of options, but I think Jak'Sho is just the most core item. And other than that, we're just trying to fit in whichever OP tank item fits the lane or matchup. Pantheon can be played support or top. I think in support, you want to go for Bloodsong, Umbral Glaive, and then probably Edge of Night. Just get a little bit of tankiness, and you can kind of go full tank after that. As Pantheon top, though, I'm pretty sure you want to rush Sundered Sky, and then you either go Eclipse Shojin or Shojin Eclipse. You can rush out Eclipse first item as well. I think that can work, but I'm pretty sure Sundered Sky is just so OP that it should be rushed all the time. Later on, you can go for actual tank items if you want. Other bruiser items like Cleaver and Steraks do work well too, but these items, all three of these, are very, very strong on Pantheon at the moment, so if you can find a way to pick them up, you definitely should. If you do decide to play Poppy support, you're going to want to go for Bloodsong or Celestial as your support item, and then you probably want to go for like Zeke's, Locket, or Trailblazer as your first item, and probably pick up other ones of those from then on. You can pick up like Frozen Heart and stuff as well, as can, pretty much any tank support at the moment. Pike build might be the easiest one on this entire list. You want to upgrade your support item into Bloodsong, and you want to rush out Lethality, so Umbral Glaive is generally the go-to. After that, just more and more Lethality. I think good items, Umbral, Opportunity, and Ghostblade tend to be the best ones. You can fit in an Edge of Night just to make it a bit harder for them to kill you. I think Hubris isn't as good on this champ. I generally recommend going for the other ones, but as long as you're building Lethality, it's going to be fine. I've seen a lot of different builds on Qiyana. I think a lot of people are going like Tier into Profane Hydra or just rushing out Profane Hydra, but I'm pretty sure the best Qiyana build doesn't involve either of these items, and I think you just want to go 2 Lethality items into Cyrilda. So what I would recommend is going Opportunity and then Voltaic into Cyrilda. I think that's going to be pretty good overall. You can go something like, Ghostblade Opportunity for more movement speed. You could even just go full damage and go something like, I don't know, Hubris plus Voltaic, but yeah, I'm pretty sure Opportunity, Voltaic, Cyrilda's is the best build. I would generally stay away from Hydra and from the tier builds, because I think at the moment they're just a bit too slow. They take too long to come online in what is a very fast-paced meta. In my opinion, the best build on Quinn is just to go Voltaic, Stormrazor, and then Ghostblade. Quinn is a champ where you can go something like a Hubris. You're very good at snowballing, so if you wanted to drop the Stormrazor and just go for even more lethality, I think that's something you can do. Plenty of people have been doing just full lethality Quinn builds, and then you just fit in more lethality items because there's really just no shortage of them. I do think it is nice to have a Stormrazor in your build because it does allow you to pivot to crit later on, but if you want to play full lethality and snowball really hard, especially with the Hubris, I think that's definitely something you can play for. On Rakan, most of the time you should be going Celestial as your support item, and then I think you just want to go Trailblazer Zeke's most of the time, while you can go for other options, things like Locket, Frozen Heart, etc. I think they're not as valuable on Rakan. Like, Rakan gets a lot of tankiness just from kind of being extremely mobile and having a CC chain that lasts long enough for him to be able to get out. So he doesn't need the resistances as much as other supports. So I'd really recommend just Celestial to help survive the initial engage, going Trailblazer Zeke after that, and then we can look for some other cheap support items if there are any you need. On Rammus, you're pretty much always going to rush out a Thornmail, and then it can kind of depend on what you're playing against. So for Magic Resist, Hollow Radiance is pretty much the best option. If you want even more armor, you can go for something like a Sunfire. I would definitely recommend picking up a Jak'Sho either second or third. I think it absolutely needs to be in the build. So really your core items are Thornmail and Jak'Sho, and it's just fitting in the items around it. Like, do we need Magic with this first item? Not often do you need this, unless you're like a Rammus one-trick, because chances are you're picking Rammus into an AD champ. But if you do play against AP, something like this can be good. Again, if you're playing against a full AD team, sometimes you can go 2 armor items before going Jak'Sho. I think that's fine as well. I think Unending Despair is another great item for building later on in the game, but really it is Jak'Sho and Thornmail that are your absolute core items that cannot be skipped. Rek'Sai has one main choice to make, which is, do you want to rush lethality before going for your Titanic? So I think going for the Titanic Bruiser build is something like, Titanic Sterak's, you can go Titanic Eclipse, you can go, you know, Titanic's Cleaver. All of that is fine. But if you want, and especially if you're snowballing, you can buy a Ghost Blade before this, and that allows you to really take over the game, but it does delay you getting tanky for a while. At the same time, like, it allows you to be an absolute monster before then. So these are really your core items, like the Titanic and the Bruiser items. But if you're snowballing or you find you're against a bunch of squishies, maybe you pick up a couple of kills early or something like that, I think buying a Ghost Blade before going into this build can be very good. I think if you fall behind, you probably just want to skip it completely. I don't think I would go for it if you're falling behind. Rel can be played support or jungle. In support, you're pretty much just going to go Celestial, Trailblazer Zeke's, or Trailblazer Locket. I think those are pretty good. If you're playing in the jungle, you can go for full tank. Alternatively, jungle Rel can build a lot of support items as well. You know, these items are very cheap and you still get really tanky, so you can look for something like that in the jungle. But overall, I think Rel is a better support at the moment. And these items pretty much will just serve you well in any game. You can choose between, you know, do we want the Locket AoE? Do we want the extra damage from our Zeke's or whatever? So all choices, but Trailblazer I think is pretty important, and I would recommend picking that up first item. On Renata, what I've seen most people doing is upgrading their support item to Celestial, and then good rush items are stuff like Ardent, Shirelia, or Locket. If I go here to the Renata Pro builds, you'll see what I mean. So there's like Celestial this game, Dreammaker, Solstice Slay, Bloodsong. There really is a bit of everything. So I'm pretty sure at the moment Bloodsong is overtuned enough and Celestial is overtuned enough that you probably want one of those. But I think after these are toned down, it might be that the other options become viable as well. But I think for now, you're probably wanting Celestial if you're in danger of dying. Otherwise, getting away with the Dreammaker is probably the greedy choice, especially if you're rushing out an Ardent. And then, yeah, you kind of choose between those early items of, do we want the Shirelia for the movement speed? Do we want to rush out the Ardent? Or maybe even the Locket for a bit more survivability. On Renekton, the most common build is people just going Sundered Sky into Shojin. I will say something else I've seen is Titanic into these items, or even Titanic into Cleaver. I'm pretty sure the Titanic build is pretty underrated. At the same time, again, these items, these two specifically, Sundered Sky and Shojin, are very, very overpowered, so you probably want to be rushing these most times. But just bear in mind that there are some games where the Titanic might be more effective. Rengar is another one of those lethality junglers that just has so many different options. I'm a fan of rushing out Hubris into Hydra on this champion and then just going kind of situational lethality items from then on. You can go Hydra before Hubris, but I don't know, like both of these items kind of feel like rush items, right? Like having the Hydra to help you clear a bit faster. Also, the on-activation of this, dealing bonus damage to low health enemies, really allows you to snowball. At the same time, the earlier you can get Hubris, the more AD you'll get. So I'm pretty sure the best order to do it in is this. And I think stuff like Voltaic, I mean, it's a very good item in general, but I think it's a little overrated on a champion like Rengar. So I would look for this build here, just getting your Hubris as quick as possible and going for the Hydra and opportunity after that. Now, while I was researching Riven across all the different one-tricks, I saw so many different builds, but I'm pretty sure the best one is actually just the most popular one here, which is just making use of the OP Bruiser items at the moment. So going Eclipse, Sundered Sky, and Shojin. Something else I've also seen is people just going, you know, Ravenous into Shojin, which I think is not too bad. And I have seen, again, like full lethality builds from one trick, stuff like Hubris, you know, picked up or something like that. But I think these Bruiser items are the strongest, and you should be trying to find ways to incorporate them into the build. So I would recommend this, but you might want to look around the various different one tricks and kind of ask them their opinions, because, again, I saw a billion different options on this champ, but this is what I recommend. For Rumble's builds, you have several different options, but you definitely want a Liandry in pretty much whatever one you're going. So the question really comes down to, are you rushing Liandry's or are you going to rush out Rockabelt first? I'm kind of the opinion that Rockabelt is a little overrated on Rumble. I think part of the reason Rockabelt used to be so good on this champ is because of the flat pen. But now that it doesn't have it, I feel like the dash is honestly not as valuable. So I would recommend rushing out the Liandry's, and I would actually say skip Protobelt. So I know some people swear by Protobelt Rumble, but I think it's kind of bad. And then which items do you go after that? So if you're against squishies and you really just want to burst them down, Storm Surge can be a good second item. I also think, though, like, if they have just some tanks, or you don't really feel like you're going to be able to burst any of their, like, backline down, I think going Riftmaker second on this champ is really good. You can do something like Liandry's Riftmaker into Rylai's. You can do Liandry's Riftmaker Zhonya, Liandry's Riftmaker Rabadons. I think the Riftmaker Liandry combo is really, really good, and it's no exception on Rumble. So I'm kind of more of a fan of those builds, but at the same time, you know, Storm Surge currently very overtuned. It is being nerfed next patch, so maybe that's something you go away from then. But at least for now, yeah, I'd recommend Liandry's, either Storm Surge or Riftmaker, into situational items from then. Rise builds, you have one big choice to make, which is, do you want Rod of Ages or do you want to skip it? So Rod of Ages is an incredible item on Rise, but it does take time to come online. And with how fast solo queue is at the moment, I have seen some people skipping it. So I've seen stuff like straight Seraphs into Storm Surge. Obviously, Storm Surge is a very good item. Ceres into something like Ludens just because it is giving mana. Now, I'm pretty sure, though, despite how fast solo queue is, I'm pretty sure it's still better to go Roa into Ceres just because they do so well on Rise. And then after that, you have situational items. So currently, Frozen Heart third is really, really good because it's extremely cheap, gives a lot of mana, gives armor. Otherwise, something like Deathcap is really good. Obviously, you're getting a lot of AP from your build here already, and you're probably taking Gathering Storm in your runes a lot of the time. So having that Rabadon's third is a big spike. And from then on, it really is situational AP items. So obviously, you know, stuff like Zonya, Banshee, Void Staff, Cosmic, all good options. You can even pick up something like a Riftmaker or Liandry in your build. I think Liandry's kind of underrated on this champ, being picked up later on. So all things to think about, but yeah, I would recommend going Roa Ceres. If you want to skip the Roa, you can, but I think it's pretty important that you pick it up. It's just too strong not to. On Samira, just about everyone goes Collector, i.e. into Shield Bow or LDR or BT or basically whatever you need. That being said, I have seen IE delayed sometimes from all lethality items, so something like Collector Ghostblade or Collector Hubris into the IE, which offers you a stronger 2-item spike, but it does delay some of these items, and importantly, it actually delays you getting tankier, right? Because even if you're delaying IE, you are delaying IE for damage, right? So it's really just a substitution. But what's really happening is you're delaying items like Shield Bow into much later in the build. So if you feel like you're going to have trouble team fighting, I really would not recommend that. Because at some point you're going to be too squishy and you're just going to instantly die. But if they don't have a lot of CC, you can, I think, just go for more lethality and, you know, use that to snowball. And you might even end up getting your items at the same time if you end up getting enough gold just from, you know, getting a lot of kills. So definitely something to think about. I think it's safest just to do this, but at the same time, current lethality items are very, very strong. So finding a way to use them in your build does make a lot of sense. On Sejuani, you're pretty much just going to be rushing one of the Sunfire items. So you can either go Sunfire, obviously, or you can take Hollow. Now, these are, remember, these both share the Immolate passive, so you don't want to stack them. But you can choose which one you want, depending on if you need armor or MR. And then from then, you can just abuse OP tank items. So you could do something like, you know, Hollow Radiance, Unending Despair into Jackshow. You could do Sunfire into Kanik into Jackshow. All of those are good. You can pick up a Liandry's really late in your build for extra damage if you want. I would kind of recommend staying away from items like Thornmail. I think Thornmail is a very weak item, so don't get baited too much by this. But yeah, there's a lot of OP tank items that you can use, and having a Jackshow in the build at some point will make you virtually unkillable. On Senna, you will be going Bloodsong as your support item, and from there, you'll be going Umbral, Ghostblade into, you know, pretty much situational items. I think Rapid Fire third is the best most of the time for the extra movement speed and the range. It makes it a lot easier to actually deal your damage. The Edge of Night can also be a decent third option just for making you a bit more survivable. Alternatively, I mean, what else can you buy? I would stay away from Voltaic third. I think going for a third item, something like Opportunity can be good. In my opinion, playing without extra movement speed can kind of be troublesome. And I think having the extra movement speed, whether it's from Rapid Fire or Opportunity, does allow you to just deal your damage a lot easier. So I'd recommend going for that, or that Edge of Night third. Seraphine has a bunch of different builds. So the most common Seraphine build at the moment is for AD carry Seraphine, which is this build here. Again, I'll link this in the description below. So if you want to find more info about this, you can, but basically it's abusing the OP support item at the moment to just make more gold. And this is very, again, very, very strong in the bot lane position. Now, if you're playing Seraphine mid, there's a couple different builds. You can do something like Tear into Lichbane into other AP CDR items. So stuff like, obviously, Ceres is good, Cosmic, or you can even go support items. You know, you can buy something like a Staff of Flowing Water and Ardent. There's a lot of different things you can do. If you decide you want to play Seraphine support, you're going to want to go Dreammaker as your support item. And from there, you probably just want to go Moonstone into like Ardent or Staff and probably pick up the other one after that as well. Basically, just trying to make as much AoE healing, shielding buffs as you can. But I think the best role for Seraphine at the moment is in that AD carry position. That being said, I think she is viable in both support and mid as well. Set can be played top or support. I think the best top lane build is to rush out Titanic and then second item either Stridebreaker or Sundered Sky, depending on what you need. So obviously the more ranged champs they have, the more valuable Stridebreaker is. If you verse more melees and you can just brawl the whole time, then Sundered Sky second is probably better. From that point on, you can just pick up, you know, whichever item you didn't, or more bruiser items, stuff like Sterak's can be good. For set support, you want to take Celestial as your support upgrade, and from there, I would recommend rushing Trailblazer as your first item. And second item, you can go something like a Locker or Frozen Heart, and after that, it's pretty situational. I think Frozen Heart is a really good second item, though. Again, Locket can be quite good, and you can buy both as well. That can be your second and third items. But from there, you'll really just be looking to grab either cheap support items or some tank items if you can afford them. Shaco really has two main builds at the moment, and the first one is just to go Voltaic into move speed lethality items, so either Opportunity Ghostblade or Ghostblade Opportunity. I think these are pretty strong, and they definitely allow you to snowball really hard. The other take on Shaco builds is just to rush out Profane Hydra, and I think there's a lot of people that just swear by this because The Profane Hydra, while it is much more expensive and, you know, just generally takes a lot longer to get going, it is really good once you do get it. It allows you to clear faster, and also the active on this does a lot of damage against low health targets, which can be really, really nice. So I actually kind of feel that, like, as you get higher and higher elo, it's going to be more important to, you know, put camps on cooldown and stuff like that. So I actually think the Profane Hydra build might be stronger, and then you can just go for regular lethality, you know, the same build you would go for just after your Hydra. Which I think is good. The only problem is it just takes longer for you to come online. Now, it's possible there's kind of like a hybrid of this that could work. You know, something like Dirk into Profane Hydra maybe could be the build. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth experimenting. These are by no means weak, but I think the Hydra build might just be better. On Shen, wave clear is very important, so I think you should be rushing a wave clear item every game. So that can be Hollow Radiance versus AP, Sunfire against AD, and then you can kind of build a little situationally after that. I think there should pretty much always be a Jak'Sho in your build eventually. I think Thornmail is very overrated, don't get baited too hard by it, but yeah, Jak'Sho third can be really, really good. You can go something like, you know, if you really want armor, you can go like Sunfire, Unending Despair, Jak'Sho. If you want MR, you know, it can be Hollow, Kanek, you know, Jak'Sho, that all works as well. Some other things I've seen is picking up Titanic first item. I've actually just seen a straight Titanic rush into regular tank items, so that way you don't really need your Sunfire passive as much. Also, Titanic is very good in the build later on, so these builds, like, I wouldn't trust this too much. The main key is just finding which way do you want your wave clear. Again, that being one of the Sunfire items or Titanic, and then you can build situational tank items after that, Jak'Sho being probably the best one to pick up, especially after your 3 items. Shyvana can be played either jungle or top at the moment. I think the best jungle build is just this one here, where you go Nashor's Storm Surge into Rabadon's. I'm not as big a fan of Shadowflame third. I do think the Rabadon's overall is more damage, so I would recommend going for that. If you're going to play top lane Shyvana, what I normally see is Titanic Hydra into Iceborne into Shojin, which seems kind of strong. Not listed here, obviously. But that's the best build I've seen. I do think Shyvana top is a lot weaker than Shyvana jungle, so I, you know, generally recommend just playing it AP in the jungle. But if you do want to play it top lane, I think that's the way to do it. Singed is another one of those champs with 3 core items at the moment, which is Liandry, Riftmaker, and Rylai's. And really all that's happening is you're choosing which order do you want to rush them in. So I think rushing out Liandry's first is the best most of the time. It just does much more damage than either of the other two. From there, though, you kind of have to decide. You know, Rylai's second can be good for, you know, chasing down range champs, can also just be good for kiting, but it does deal a lot less damage than going for something like the Riftmaker. So I think if you can, you should be going Liandry, Riftmaker, Rylai, and it's no surprise really that it's the most popular build over here. But I think there are still games where you should be looking for Rylai's second. Should you go Rylai's first ever? I'm kind of the opinion no. I think the Liandry's rush is just too strong to give up. It just adds so much damage. So I would really recommend this build here, but possibly there's the ability to change around which order you're going them in. Scion builds depend a little bit on your matchup and lane. So if you're playing top lane Scion, most of you would just be doing the regular tank Scion, which will be you're rushing out one of these items here, probably Hollow or Sunfire. I think Heartsteel Rush is a greedier option, but it is good if you can get away with it, especially in easy matchups. Titanic, obviously, in your build at some point is good. I probably wouldn't recommend buying it this early. Other very solid tank items, obviously Hollow Radiance, Unending Despair are very good. Picking up a Jak'Sho later in your build is great. Now, if you want to play Scion mid, especially against AP, you can do something like Hollow Radiance into Kanek, which makes you just absolutely unkillable, especially if you're going for items like Jak'Sho and Titanic later on. So that can be an option. If you do want to play Lethality Scion, I'm sure you all know who the expert is. I think the build is either Hubris Opportunity Ghostblade or Hubris Ghostblade Opportunity. Maybe even then, maybe you drop the Hubris just because it doesn't have movement speed on it early, so it could be hard to actually get the snowball going. But you can pretty much choose, I think, whichever lethality item to start with, although I do think the movement speed ones like Opportunity and Ghostblade are generally going to be the best for Scion. On Sivir, there are a couple build options. I'm pretty sure Kraken Navori into situational crit items is the best though, so PD can be good, LDR, BT, pretty much anything you want at that point can be good. I would recommend staying away from these builds. I think Shiv in general is very overrated at the moment. I also don't think Hexplate and Cleaver are amazing on Sivir. So I really like the Kraken Navori build, but you know, if you want to experiment with these, you definitely could. I really do think these are stronger. Skarner doesn't get played very much, but I'm pretty sure the best builds are, if you're playing Jungle Skarner, probably to go Iceborne into tank. So you can go something like Iceborne into Hollow Radiance into Jak'Sho, or you can go Iceborne, maybe Unending Despair into Jak'Sho. I think those are all very good. If you ever want to play Skarner top, you probably rush out Sundered Sky and then you go tank after that. I'm pretty sure all these builds that people are showing here just suck. I'd probably stay away from them. I think the tank builds are definitely better. Sona, the support item, I've seen a few of them. So I've seen Bloodsong, I've seen Celestial, and I've seen Dreammaker. I think if you can get away with Dreammaker, you definitely should. Possibly you need to be a bit tanky with Celestial, although a lot of the time I think it's maybe just a positioning issue. So I'd really try go for Dreammaker. Then when it comes to your supportive items here, I think Echoes of Helia is a bait these days. I think you want to just be going for things like Moonstone, Ardent Censer, Staff of Flowing Water. Dawn Core later in your build is quite good. You can obviously pick up a Shurelya's if you want the movement speed. I think Echoes of Helia, lock it. Maybe not the best items on Sona, and I'd probably stay away from them. Thrax's build is very simple. You're going to go Dreammaker as your support item, and you're going to rush out a Moonstone as soon as you can. From that point, it's a bit situational, so Redemption, Ardent are both fine items. If you need something like a Shurelya's, it can be fine, and later on, you've got more options like Dawn Core later in the build, obviously, is very good. If you don't really know what to do, I think going with something like this is all completely fine. Really, as long as you're going Dreammaker Moonstone, you pretty much can't go wrong with items past that point. Swain builds are very divisive at the moment, so I'll talk about what I think is the best, and I'll also talk about what other people have been using. So I'm pretty sure the best build is just to go Liandry's into Riftmaker into either Rylai's or Tank. So you can go Rylai's third, or you can go something like Kaenic third if you need the Magic Resist. Zhonya's third obviously is a fine item. And probably picking up a Rylai's again fourth if you didn't pick it third is probably good. Now the builds I've seen other people doing, so one is Malignance. The Malignance burn is kind of nice and you can apply it to a lot of different people, but the problem is having no extra HP is kind of bad. And in my opinion, it's not very good because it delays other really significant spikes like Liandry's and Rylai's. It's possible you could actually buy Malignance later on in the game and it might actually be decent, but even then, I don't really like it. So personally, I would stay away from Malignance. The other thing that I have seen is people going Rod of Ages instead of Malignance. So something like Roa Liandry into Rylai. And again, this is fine. The only problem being, once again, we're either delaying, one, we're delaying Liandry, but we're also delaying stuff like Rylai and Riftmaker to potentially too late in the build for us to even get them in that game. So I don't really like those builds. I would stay away from Roa. I would stay away from Malignance. I would just go Liandry's, Riftmaker. Make sure you're taking enough mana in your runes because that's going to be the real thing that's holding you back. I think you need to have mana flow. You need to have presence of mind. Also, very important that you're taking Ghost because if you aren't getting Rylai's until third, it's going to be really hard to stick on people. You could even go Phase Rush as your rune, although I've played it with Conqueror, but I mean you could do Phase Rush as your primary rune if you needed to as well. But yeah, I think these are a bait, and I really like the Liandry Riftmaker Rylai build. The most common build on Sylas at the moment is just to go for the full one-shot, so going Electrocute, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame. I actually don't think this is the best build. I think the best Sylas build is to play Rod of Ages Cosmic into Lichbane, or Rod of Ages Cosmic into Zhonya, Rod of Ages Cosmic Deathcap. I think those are all good. I would generally stay away from the one-shot build, especially after it gets nerfed. I think it's definitely good in games where you're snowballing, right? Like if you get some kills early, I could see you going for this, and if they're all squishy, I could see you going for this as well. But I do think it's inferior overall just to the regular Sylas build. Maybe it's a little dependent on what ults you have available, right? Like if you see a bunch of ults that allow you just to burst, or if you see something that's going to allow you to survive the team fight without being tanky, I could see it. But at least the games that I pick Sylas in, I think Roa Cosmic is a superior option. Syndra builds are kind of interesting. I think the easiest build to play is to go Seraph's Cosmic, and it just plays a lot like Syndra from last split. So if you've been struggling with Syndra this split, I'd kind of recommend trying that because it just gives you, again, ton of CDR, allows you to put out a bunch of stuns. It's good against pretty much every comp. That being said, the Syndra build that I've been finding success with is just going Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame. So you buy a Chapter, you don't actually upgrade it to Ludens, and then, yeah, you go Storm Surge, Shadow Flame, and Deathcap. If you want to upgrade your Chapter item later on, it can be Malignance just for the ultimate ability haste. In my mind, Ludens is kind of overrated just as an item at the moment, so I probably wouldn't build it until it gets buffed. You can do this if you want like a full mana item, but I think the better mana item on Syndra is actually Seras, at least at the moment. Again, mainly because Ludens is super undertuned. Are there any other items you could go? You could maybe go second item Liandry. Like if you're against a bunch of tanks, you could do something like Seras Liandry. But the problem is then you don't have CDR. And like, I don't know, Syndra, you can deal with tanks with Seras Liandry's, but I don't think it's the best. I think you might even still be better off going Seras Cosmic in that case. But yeah, those are really your two builds. Seras Cosmic for the CDR build, or going Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame for the burst build. Tahm Kench is a very interesting champ at the moment because most of Tahm in high-low is just played as a support. That being said, it's played as farming support. So you might play Senna with Tahm, or you might even just play double support item with Tahm. And that means you have a lot more gold than you normally do. So items you can normally build then as a Tahm support, as you can go stuff like Sunfire can be good. Obviously, Hollow Radiance, Kaenic can be good. Jackshow is great in your build later on. If you are going a support item, it should probably be Celestial most of the time. Now, if you do want to play Tahm Kench Tom, I'm pretty sure you just build full tank. So you'd probably see something like, I don't know, Heartsteel. You'd probably see like Hollow Radiance, Kaenic, Titanic Hydra, maybe like very late in the build. So that's all things you can consider. I do think Tahm support is a lot better, or at least Tahm bot lane is a lot better, and that's what you more commonly see. If you want to know more about Tahm top, I'd probably recommend just checking out some of the one tricks because it's pretty rare, at least in Halo. On Talia, you have to decide if you want to play a burst build or a DPS build. So if you're playing a DPS build similar to Syndra, you want to go Seraph's Cosmic. If you're playing a burst build, what I would recommend is just going Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadowflame. I think that is better than Ludens most of the time, and you can just sit on the Chapter until later in the game. I've kind of been pretty vocal about this, but I think Ludens is sort of a bait at the moment. I think sitting on the Chapter is better. You can do something like Seraphs into Storm Surge if you want, but then in my opinion, don't go Shadowflame third. You just go for something like a Deathcap third. And I don't really like that build that much on Talia because I think that either commit to full DPS or commit to full burst. So yeah, I'd recommend, just to summarize it, Seraphs, Cosmic, Rabadon, or going Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadowflame, depending on if you need burst or if you need to deal with tanks, I guess. You can build a Liandry later in your build as well, you know, maybe around the 4th and 5th item. Kind of hard to fit in the build early, but yeah, you can definitely look for it at some point. Talon's build will depend a lot on which role you're playing it in. So if you're playing mid-Talon, your options really are you can play full Assassin with something like Ghostblade, Opportunity into full tech, gives you a lot of move speed, gives you a lot of damage. There are also Talon mid builds with Conqueror, where you go something like this, you know, abuse the Bruiser items, so something like Eclipse into Sundered Sky. In the jungle, I've seen pretty much everyone, again, going for Lethality, and the only real choice you're making is do you want a Hydra or not. So you can just build the same thing. You know, you can go something like Ghostblade Opportunity, or you can go Ghostblade Hubris Opportunity. Some people, though, they do go for a Hydra early on, which the thing with Hydra is it's much weaker up until the point that you get it, but once you get it, it's a really strong spike. So that's something you can consider. If you're going Hydra, it should be as your first item. But I think full Lethality builds are completely fine as well, and there is a Bruiser option available also. On Taric, your support item is going to be either Dreammaker or Celestial. I think Dreammaker is a little greedier, but if you can get away with it, it is strong. But Celestial is definitely your safer, tankier option. You pretty much always want to rush out a tier because it's really difficult to play with Taric's mana cost without it. So I'd go for tier, and then I think Locket first is the best most of the time, although you can go for other support items, and then you can kind of just look for tank items from then. So stuff like Frozen Heart obviously fits in the build very nicely. You can go regular support items like Knight's Vow, Zeke. You can even upgrade your tier into Fimbulwinter, although this isn't a great item if I'm honest, so I wouldn't be opposed to just sitting on the tier and replacing this with something like a Frozen Heart, although this does give you extra HP, so it definitely can be something you look for. Teemo has 3 core items, which are Nash's, Malignance, and Liandry. So really all we're thinking about is which order do we want to build them in. I think if you're playing top lane a lot of the time, Nash's would be your best rush, especially against a melee champ, because it's going to allow you to pressure them the most. If you're not against melee champs, though, I think going Liandry's, Malignance, and then Nash's might be better. If you're rushing out Nash's, I think going for Liandry second is better and then delaying Malignance a little bit. So you're really just deciding, you know, which order to get them in. I think Liandry's is generally your highest priority, unless you need, you know, Nash's for the lane. And Malignance is probably the lowest priority. I wouldn't recommend delaying Liandry later than Malignance pretty much ever. Like, I don't think rushing Malignance into Liandry is very good. But yeah, just keep those in mind and build these items, and then from there, again, we can just go situational AP items, stuff like Rabadons, Void, etc. On Thresh, your support item can be either Celestial or Solstice Slay. I think Celestial is a stronger item overall, so I'd probably go for that. But Solstice Slay definitely isn't bad. And then for your early core items, you're choosing between Trailblazer, Locket, and Frozen Heart. I think Frozen Heart is really, really good on Thresh. That can be something you think about. Trailblazer and Locket obviously are just good support items in general, so you probably want to be looking for some of those. Other things you can consider later on your build, or just if none of those options look good in that game, is stuff like Knight's Vow and Zeke's. But I really think OP items at the moment, you know, Trailblazer, Locket, and Frozen Heart seem to be the best, so I would look for some of those first. Tristana's builds haven't changed whatsoever. You're pretty much always just going Kraken, Navori into situational crit items. Most likely it's going to be Kraken, Navori into BT, because that's the safest build overall. If you need Armor Pen, though, obviously we can go LDR. PD is a very greedy option and probably feels the best, although it is really risky. I think having no lifesteal at that point can be a problem, but as long as you're going Kraken, Navori, and then whichever crit items you need, you can't go wrong. Trundle gets played top or jungle at the moment. If you're playing jungle Trundle, I would recommend just going Titanic into tank, or if you're really greedy, going Titanic Triforce into tank. So that could be something like Titanic Triforce into Frozen Heart, or just straight Titanic Frozen Heart. If you're playing Trundle top, obviously you're building mainly for the 1v1, so items like Ravenous and Triforce are very, very good for that. You can go Hullbreaker, but I think a lot of the time, Hullbreaker isn't quite as good as it was before. It allows you to clear towers even faster, which is good, but you need to be careful not to buy this in a game where by buying this, you're actually not as strong in the split push. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want this to be the difference between winning that split push or not. You want this to be bought if you're already winning the split push really hard, and you can win it even harder. So Trundle obviously very good at 1v1, so most of the time you'll just be going for these. But like, let's say for example that you need that Bork to win the split push harder, I would say it's better item than Hullbreaker in that situation. So just be careful of that. But like most of the time you can just stick with these. Tryndamere builds have been experimented with a lot, but I think ultimately the best build is actually just this one, which is Kraken Navori Rageblade, and I think you can do this pretty much every game. In my mind, items or item builds like this, like Titanic and Hullbreaker, are kind of a bait. I think IE is just sort of inferior to Navori. I'd recommend delaying your Rageblade until after you get both Kraken and Navori. So yeah, I think just stick with this build here. It looks to be the best to me. So Twisted Fate early on got a lot of popularity due to the one-shot build with Storm Surge, but I do think the far more consistent build is just to play Roa Lichbane into Rapid Fire. So this was kind of the TF build from a very long time ago. Rod of Ages allows you to survive the lane with your Catalyst up against either difficult mage matchups or against those burst assassins. Lichbane is just the highest damage option. It's also really, really good for split pushing because you get movement speed. Obviously, you can hit the towers. Super, super nice. And then you can skip Rapid Fire. I think Rapid Fire is good because it allows you to get those longest stun cards out, but this can just be something like a Zhonya's, another defensive item. It could even be something like Medjai's into Deathcap if you're really, really strong. But I would generally recommend just going for this. I think it's the safest build, and I think it works pretty much every game. Twitch builds are very polarizing at the moment. So you have some people that swear by going the Bork, Hexplate, Runan's Titanic build, which makes you very tanky. It makes you very strong, obviously, when you're pressing ult. But you are weaker outside of those windows, and some people say the extra tankiness just isn't really worth it. If you want to play a more normal build, you can do something like Kraken Runan's IE, you can do Kraken IE Runan's, you can do Bork builds instead, so Bork Runan's IE obviously is all fine. There are also AP Twitch builds, so if you're playing Twitch support, or if you're just like a Twitch bot that ends up with a full AD team, with that build you probably want to go Nash's into Shadow Flame, and then you can go something like Deathcap from after that. If you're playing Twitch support, I think your support item should be either Bloodsong or Realm Spike. I'm honestly not too sure which one is better, but I imagine they're both probably fine. But yeah, there's a lot of different builds, and I think they're all pretty decent. Like, normally when there's a lot of different builds, it means that there isn't just like a clear best one, right? So I'd recommend just trying them out, seeing which one feels better. Maybe look up some of the Twitch 1 tricks and see what they think, and you can copy them. Udyr is getting played a lot in the top lane right now as a full tank, so they normally rush out the Iceborne or the Hollow Radiance, depending on if you're versus AD or AP, and then you really just build situational tank items after then, so normally picking up a Jackshot at some point. Frozen Heart, obviously a very good item in the build. Abyssal Mask can be good, especially because you do deal a fair amount of damage on your own, especially if you have other APs around you. Obviously, this is quite good. I think picking up Liandry's later in your build can be good as well. I think I probably wouldn't build it too early, but Liandry's is a great damage item for, you know, AP tank tops pretty much. If you do want to play Udyr in the jungle, you probably want to play it with Riftmaker Liandry. Yeah, something like this. I would imagine that rushing out Liandry's is better first. So something like Liandry Riftmaker into Rylai's could be good. Liandry Riftmaker into Jackshow. I haven't really seen anyone play just like an actual Titanic build in my game yet, so I would say AP Udyr jungle, or you're just playing tank Udyr top. On Urgot, it seems like the best build is just to go Titanic Cleaver into Sterak's. I think you do want to rush out the Titanic. I think going Cleaver first is fine, but it's just a much weaker item overall than Titanic, and you could go for a Ghostblade Lethality build instead, and maybe this works sometimes, especially if you're versus a very squishy champ, but I think against most top laners, just going Titanic Cleaver into tankier items like Jackshow or Sterak's is going to be better. Varus, another champion with a bunch of builds, so if you want to play Lethality Varus, you probably want to go Tyr, Ghostblade, then you can go Manamune and more Lethality items, or you can go Serylda's. You can delay your Manamune a bit longer, so I've seen some people going something like Tyr, Ghostblade, Hubris, or Tyr, Hubris, Opportunity, something like that into Manamune. I think picking up Manamune second is generally better, but it's something you can do. And then from then on, obviously more Lethality items is good, so the ones already mentioned are quite strong. You can pick up a Serylda's at some point for a bit more armor pen. If you want to play on-hit Varus, it seems like Bork, Rageblade, Terminus, Jackshow, or, you know, Bork, Rageblade, Wit's End. Those seem to be the ways to go. I think you can end up very, very tanky and very hard to deal with in the late game. There's also AP Varus, which isn't too popular at the moment, but I think you'll be going Nashor's Riftmaker, and then maybe Liandry's Deathcap, or it might even be Nashor's Liandry's Deathcap is better. I'm not too sure, but obviously the Nashor's has to be in there somewhere, and then you probably want one of those health AP items, either Liandry's or Riftmaker, or maybe even both. On Vayne, we can just use the regular Bork, Rageblade, Terminus into Jackshow build, which is really, really good on any on-hit champion at the moment. You can also go for some sort of burst build, so I've seen something like Voltaic into Triforce into Hexplate, which gives you a bit of tankiness. It gives you pretty much unparalleled dueling and a lot of just just upfront burst damage, which can be kind of nice. The more wild builds I've seen is stuff like Hubris into Ghostblade into Essence Reaver, so some sort of lethality one-shot build. I think those all have potential, but in my mind, the best build is just this one here, where you go Orc, Rageblade, Terminus into Jackshow. The build I like the most on Veigar is to go Tear into Storm Surge into Rabadons. This gives you a ton of upfront damage, it gives you a lot of AP early on. You can upgrade that Tear into a Saras either as your third item or later on if you need a different situational item third. The only real weakness of this build is that you do lack CDR, but you can grab this in your runes with stuff like Transcendence and Ability Haste. Now, another thing you can do is if you're in a difficult matchup, instead of rushing out a Tear, you can go for Rod of Ages instead. So go something like Rod of Ages, Storm Surge into Rabadons, and that can make those Assassin matchups and difficult Mage matchups a bit more survivable. But I think if you do get the luxury of just going Tear, Storm Surge into Rabadons, I do like that the best. Vel'Koz's builds haven't really been figured out in my mind, so I've seen a lot of Malignants into Shadow Flame or Ludens into Shadow Flame in mid. I'm pretty sure a better mid build is actually just to go Saras and Liandry and play for kind of anti-tank rather than burst. I know Azap has also been testing a tank Vel'Koz build, so I'll put this in the description below if you guys want to go check it out and get his reasoning and which order to build it and stuff like that. Obviously, he knows a lot more about tank Vel'Koz than I do. If you want to play support Vel'Koz, I think the best build is to go Realm Spike into Mandate into Liandry, maybe a Rylai's after that. I think that gives you a combination of a lot of damage while being relatively cheap and also a bit of health. So that can be useful since you are going to be very, very squishy. On Vex, as with other burst mages, I believe the best build is to go Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame, then you buy a Death Cap, and if you don't need a Void, you can upgrade your Chapter into Malignance later on in the game. I think Ludens and Malignance are both baits. I think that Ludens is just not a strong item in general. I think Malignance is also just not a great item on Vex. The ability haste on your ultimate is quite nice, but I think it is better just to sit on the Chapter, rush out these items, and you can upgrade it into Malignance later on in your build. Vi's build really depends on how tanky you need to be, so in competitive, a lot of the time they're just doing stuff like Cleaver into Frozen Heart, which in my opinion wouldn't work so well in solo queue. I think going Sundered Sky into like Hexblade or Cleaver is probably the way to go, just a bit more damage. From that point, I mean, if you want even more damage, we can go for something like Shojin. At the same time, I think going for more kind of Bruiser-esque, defensive items like full Sterak's, Frozen Heart, Kaenic, Hollow Radiance, whatever kind of MR or tank item you need at that point to survive, I think can be good. You can look for something like more, but I think you can also end up just being kind of like a paper champ and just actually falling apart before you have the means to do your damage. The nice thing is that with just a couple of offensive items, you can deal a lot of damage even if you build tank after that. So I would say don't greed on the tank items too much. At the same time, if you're snowballing, if you don't think you're going to take a lot of damage, you can go a bit greedier. On Viego, the main choice you're going to make is, are you going to go Kraken Triforce or are you going to go Kraken Titanic? So I'm actually of the opinion that Kraken Titanic is a bit better. And so then you can do something like Kraken Titanic into, Cleaver. You can go Sundered Sky. You can go actual just like off-tank items like Sterak's or Death Dance or whatever. I'm just of the opinion that that Titanic is overall a better item than Triforce at the moment. At the same time, is Triforce bad? Not really. I think it's still, as you can see, a very often bought item. But I would really recommend experimenting with Kraken into Titanic instead, if you still like Triforce, so I'm down for that. Victor, I think, is one of the champs with the weirdest take on builds at the moment. So you would kind of think that Victor can somewhat use a burst build. Something like Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame, like a lot of the other burst mages can do. The problem is, I think Victor is just inferior at this compared to other mages, so it's kind of like, why would you pick Victor to do this over something else? Can you still do it? Yes. If you verse a bunch of squishies, Chapter, Storm Surge into Shadow Flame is a lot of damage. Now, what else can you do? I think other good Victor builds is you can do Saras into Lichbane. I think that Victor is a really, really good Lichbane user, and he scales very, very well with it. So something like Saras Lichbane, Saras Cosmic can both be good options, and those are they're really good against Bruiser comps. They're pretty good against tank view comps later in the game once you get your items. So I think Victor is a bit on the weaker side just because it feels like he doesn't do anything better than other champs at the moment. But the builds you can run, again, Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame, or Saras Lichbane / Cosmic into stuff like Death Cap and Void, etc. Vladimir, you guys probably would have seen by now, Elite 500 has popularized the tank Vladimir build. So pretty much with any Vlad build at the moment, you want to start with Riftmaker and Liandry. But from then, you can either go into AP or you can go into tank. So if you're going for AP, it's stuff like Death Cap, Cosmic, obviously can be quite good. Zhonya's fits in very well. A lot of the time, though, you will see Elite 500 just going for actual tank items, stuff like Frozen Heart or Kaenic Recurrent or whatever. So I will link his OPG again in the description below. He's probably the best Vlad that I've seen, so I'd recommend checking him out for builds. But pretty much every build will start with these two items. Riftmaker Liandry is extremely strong on Vlad, and really where you go from then is a bit up to you. Volibear is pretty much just played as an AP split push menace at the moment with Nashers into Riftmaker. If you do want to play him with something else, you can go kind of a tankier build with Iceborne, and then maybe like You can go, I don't know, Unending Despair, Hollow Radiance, you can get Jackshow third, you can get Bruiser items like Sterak's, but I'm pretty sure the AP volley build is the best one at the moment. On Warwick, all the best builds seem to be going Titanic into Sundered Sky into situational items, so if you want to be really tanky, you can go Titanic into Sundered Sky into Jackshow. If you want to still deal, you know, like a fair amount of damage, you can go for something like a Sterak's or a Hexblade. I'm kind of the opinion that Titanic, Hydra, Sundered Sky, and Jackshow are among 3 of the strongest items on the patch. So I'd probably just rush out these items, but there are other options if you want to look into them. On Wukong, I think the best build is this one here, where you go Sundered Sky Triforce into Shojin. You can drop the Triforce for something else. You could go something like Sundered Sky Cleaver Shojin, but I'm not really sure it's any better. So I really like this. I think rushing out Sundered Sky, it's such a strong item, and it should just be built pretty much every game. And then you can also drop the Shojin for other items if you need to be tankier, so something like a Maw, or just actual tank items can be bought at that point. Again, the nice thing is that on this 2-item spike, you already deal tons of damage. That being said, Wukong is pretty naturally tanky anyway, so I think a lot of the time you can just get away with the 3 damage items. Xayah, like a lot of other ADCs, hasn't really changed. You're just going to be going Kraken Navori into situational crit items, so if you need Armor Pen, you're going to go Kraken Navori LDR. A very common one is just picking up Lifesteal as your 3rd item. This can be a Maw as well if they have, you know, lots of magic users. PD and Rapid Fire, obviously greedier options. I think generally it's pretty hard to get these as 3rd items. Like, I think you do want BT or LDR 3rd most of the time, but if you really feel like there's no threat on you at all, then something like a PD is an insanely high DPS option, and obviously just round out the build with more crit items from there. Xerath, like many other mages, I think the best build is to go Chapter Storm Surge into Shadow Flame. Alternatively, I've seen some people do tier Horizon Seraphs. That's not something I've tried. Now, Horizon, I believe, is getting buffed. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but I think it's slated for a buff. So potentially that'll be a better rush eventually. But I think at the moment, Chapter Storm Surge Shadow Flame is the way to go. Another thing I've seen is people just rushing out Deathcap as their 2nd item. So going something like Luden straight into Deathcap or Seraph straight into Deathcap. I think that can be good too. Obviously, you can itemize a bit greedier on Xerath because you have such long range, but I think at the moment, making use of Storm Surge and Shadow Flame in your build probably is the play. If you do want to play Xerath support, the build probably isn't that different. I imagine you go Realm Spike as your support item, and then you're probably just rushing out a Storm Surge from there into a Shadow Flame and pretty much whatever AP items you can afford. Obviously, as a support, some of the cheaper items like Horizon and Morello can be good too because you just don't have as much gold available to you, so keep those in mind as well. On Xin Zhao, I think the best thing to do is to rush out your Sundered Sky and then go for Titanic. You can do this the other way around if you want, but I think this gives more snowballing potential, so I really like this build. Sundered Sky into Titanic into Shojin. This can of course be other bruiser items, so stuff like Maw, Sterak's of course a good, Cleaver can be an option, and from there you probably just want to go into full tank, so things like Frozen Heart, Jackshow, what else can we go? Hollow Radiance, Unending Despair, lots of options past that point. The key to Yasuo builds at the moment is finding the balance between damage and tankiness. So some of the builds I've seen is stuff like you can go Kraken into Shield Bow into Iceborne IE. That gives you quite a lot of damage and quite a lot of tankiness, but obviously you are delaying IE until 4th item. I think any build where you go IE 2nd is extremely risky, and I generally stay away from it, but you can do something like this, you know, Kraken Iceborne into IE, or Kraken Shield Bow into IE, I think that works too, but I would say buying like 1 or 2 tank items before your IE is probably the best. Yone has 2 builds. It's a bit easier to deal your damage as Yone, so you can afford to itemize a bit more aggressively. So one of the builds is just to go Kraken IE into like Bruiser or off tank. So you can go like Kraken IE Shield Bow, Kraken IE Iceborne obviously is fine. You know, the typical items like Wit's End and Death Stance all remain good as a 3rd option as well. There's also a viable Bork build on this champ where you go Bork, Shield Bow, Iceborne, Wit's End, or even full tank items at that point. So that is going to make you a lot tankier, and against comps that you just can't survive by going a full damage build, I would recommend going for that instead. That being said, I think it is easier to get away with full damage on a champ like Yone compared to Yasuo, so it probably shouldn't be your default option, but it's certainly one you should be building at least some of the time. On Yorick, you can either play Lethality or Bruiser, so you can go something like Profane Hydra and then fit in some Lethality items here, like it can be Hydra and then Opportunity, then Cyrilda and Shojin. I think that works out fine. If you want to play a Bruiser build, I'd recommend replacing Triforce with Titanic and then going for things like Sundered Sky and Shojin, so maybe something like Titanic, Sundered Sky, Shojin, that would probably be your Bruiser build. I'm not totally sure what the best Yorick build is. I know a lot of people are building this kind of build here because Profane Hydra is reasonably strong on the champ, but I have a feeling that the Bruiser builds with Titanic might actually be better. Yuumi builds, you go Dreammaker as your support item. You'll be rushing out Moonstone. From there, it's most likely you're picking up Ardent and Staff of Flowing Water. You can pick this up in the other way around if you really want to, but most of the time I think Ardent and Staff makes the most sense. From there, obviously other support items like Redemption and Mikhail are options. I think Dawn Core is a fairly good item on Yuumi as well, so don't sleep on that, picking that up later in the build. Zac makes great use of all the tank items at the moment, so you can rush out stuff like Sunfire or Hollow Radiance. After that, I mean, Spirit Visage is a pretty good option on Zac, but sometimes you just want the other OP tank items anyway. So again, like Kaenic Recurrent and Hollow Radiance are very good. Picking up a Jackshaw in the build at some point is a must. It makes you incredibly tanky. I would also recommend, like very late in the build, maybe 4 or 5 items, picking up a Liandry. As an AP tank, it can pretty much double your damage just on its own, and it's definitely worth the investment once you've got your tank items already online. On Zed, the best build is to start with Voltaic and then go either Opportunity or Hubris second. After that, we just follow that up with a Serilda, and then we can look for other things such as Edge of Night to finish off the build, or even more lethality items work here as well. The main choice then being between Opportunity and Hubris. I think Hubris is the riskier, you know, higher risk, high reward option. Opportunity is pretty much always solid, so if you're not sure, I would go for that. But as long as you're getting a Voltaic, some lethality item, then Serilda's, I think your build is going to look good. The two main Zeri builds at the moment are either this one here, where you go Hexplate, then Titanic, and then Runans. You can do this the other way around as well, but having more tankiness, I think, can be good. Alternatively, you can rush Hexplate into Navori and then just standard crit items after that. I think that's a pretty strong build too. Really, it just depends on how tanky you need to be. If you feel like you can get away with more DPS, like maybe you have a bit more peel on your team or they have a bit less threat, you can go for these builds. If you need it though, if you really do need the tankiness, I think Titanic is an excellent item to pick up in your build. On Ziggs, I think the best build is to go Seraphs into Deathcap. And the way to make that happen is to take extra AP on your runes. So you can take stuff like Gathering Storm. You can go Domination second if you want and pick up Eyeball. If you have a stacked Darkseer, like all those things make Deathcap a better second option. If you don't have enough AP to justify a Deathcap second, which with the buff to Deathcap, I think you pretty much always can. But you can do something like Seraphs into Liandry into Deathcap, but just being a very long-range champion, you can afford to itemize very greedily. I like the Seraph Deathcap into other AP items. Again, Liandry is a great choice. You can go something like Horizon or Liandry before it, though, if you can't go for the Deathcap second. On Zilean mid, I think the best build is just a lot of CDR, so you probably want to go something like Seraphs, Cosmic, maybe Morello, maybe Mande, just as many CDR items as you can get. Now, you could do something like Seraphs, Cosmic, Deathcap, but I don't think AP is as valuable on Zilean. I think at least 3 items before you go Deathcap, so maybe something like Seraphs, Cosmic, Morello, Seraphs, Cosmic, Mande, I think could be good options. If you're playing Zilean support, you want to play it with Dreammaker, and you need to take Ahri in order to apply it. Then you're pretty much just going, you know, which items do you want? You can obviously go Shurelys for more movement speed. Mande gives you a big damage option. Morello is very cheap and brings healing cut for your team. So these are all options. Cosmic is a great CDR item. It's just very, very expensive. So it can be difficult to pick up as a support, but obviously you should think about it if you get a lot of money. On Zoe, like the other burst mages, I really like just going Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame. If you do want to buy like a full mana item, it probably should be Luden. She doesn't really have other good options. So Luden, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame, or Chapter, Storm Surge, Shadow Flame are all good. I think after that, Deathcap is quite good. Lichbane is really good to pick up later in the build. If you don't need a Void or something, Lichbane is really good on this champ for the extra movement speed and the damage. But yeah, mainly just be thinking about how am I going to fit in the Storm Surge Shadow Flame. You can do it either with just a Chapter or you can go for the Ludens. On Zyra support, you'll be going for Realm Spike as your support item, and you'll probably be rushing out Liandry Rylai. You can go Rylai first if you want for a bit more CC, but I think Liandry's is much more damage, so I'd recommend going that. After you pick up these 2 items, Morello can be really good just because it's very, very cheap for pretty good stats. If you need a Void option, you can go for something like Crypt Bloom. Defensive options like Zhonya's are very good. But basically, it all revolves around these 2 and your Realm Spike, and then really you just pick up situational, cheap AP items. So guys, at long last, that is the best builds for all 167 champs in this game. If you did like this video, please like and subscribe. It took an absolute monumental effort to study all these champs and then record every single one. It took me a very, very long time. Hopefully these stay current for a while. I think some of them may be outdated eventually just by like patch changes and stuff like that. But worst case, just go back to the start where I talk about the different sites you can use. Once again, if you have any opinions on the builds, I'm sure there is stuff I'm wrong about. If you have any opinions on them, please put them in the comment section below. Thank you again so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.